In the velvet blackness of a moonless night, where the ancient forests of the frontier whispered secrets to the wind, Orhan Sahib stood alone upon a ridge of moss-covered stone, his cloak heavy with dew and the weight of unyielding purpose. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke from forgotten campfires, and the only light came from the faint, flickering embers of a single torch held by his most trusted shadow, Tarhan, who waited 10 paces behind, hand resting on the hilt of his curved blade. Orhan Sahib's eyes pierced the gloom as if the darkness itself owed him allegiance, for he had sworn before the dawn of this campaign that justice would not sleep while tyrants breath. "By the mercy of the Almighty," he murmured into the night, his voice low and resonant like the roll of distant thunder, "by the honor of the faithful and the blood of martyrs yet to come, I shall carve authority from the bones of betrayal." Shahanshah believes his throne is eternal, but fate has already sharpened the swords against him. The forest around them stirred not with the breath of beasts, but with the silent tread of 3,000 warriors, their armor muffled in cloth, their horses' hooves wrapped in leather. Orhan Sahib had chosen this hour for the ambush because the enemy host under Shahanshah's banner had grown careless, their supply lines stretched thin across the shadowed valleys, their scouts blinded by arrogance. He had studied the maps by starlight for weeks, marking every deer trail and ravine, every place where the trees grew so dense that even the bravest rider would hesitate. Encirclement was not merely a tactic to him, it was a prayer answered in steel. "Tarhan," he said without turning, his words blending into the rustle of leaves, "the left flank belongs to Damir Khan and Mahmud. Let them move like ghosts until the signal. Abdul Rahman will hold the right with Tamir Boga at his side. No man breaks formation until my blade sings first." Tarhan nodded once, his face a mask of grim resolve, the elite swordsman who had intercepted arrows meant for Orhan Sahib in battles past, the man whose loyalty was forged in the same fire that tempered their souls. "As you command, Orhan Sahib, the night is ours and the traitors within it will learn their folly before the first light." They moved then, the host slipping into the undergrowth like a tide of shadow. Hours passed in that slow, deliberate crawl, the kind that tested the faith of even the strongest heart. Orhan Sahib rode at the center, his mind turning over every oath he had taken, to restore order where Shahanshah had sown chaos, to punish the corrupt governors who bled the villages dry, to bring the light of justice to lands long choked by fear. Yet within his ranks lurked a shadow he could not yet name, whispers of Yakid, the once loyal captain whose eyes had grown distant, whose counsel had turned sharp with hidden ambition. Orhan Faladios, the fierce commander whose rivalry with Yakid burned hotter than any forge, had warned him only the night before, "That one's blade points 2 ways, Orhan Sahib, mark my words." The first clash came without warning, as all true ambushes must. A forward patrol of Shahanshah's men, perhaps 30 riders, lanterns swinging like drunken fireflies, stumbled into the concealed line where Mustafa and Alauddin Sahib waited in the thickets. Steel met steel in a sudden, brutal symphony, the ring of swords, the grunt of men driven back against tree trunks, the wet thud of arrows finding flesh. Tarhan was there in an instant, leaping from his horse to lead the charge, his blade flashing in the meager lantern light as he cut down 2 foes before they could draw breath. "For Orhan Sahib and the righteous path," he roared, and the cry was taken up by 100 voices, shattering the forest's silence like glass. Chaos bloomed then, the kind that only night in close quarters can birth. Men fought not in neat ranks but in desperate knots, shoulder to shoulder with friend and foe alike, the ground turning slick with blood and trampled leaves. Zarkin, ever the steadfast captain, drove his wedge into the enemy's rear, his axe rising and falling like the judgment of fate itself. Huleds and Killil flanked a cluster of desperate riders, their spears thrusting upward to unhorse them one by one. The air filled with smoke as fallen lanterns spilled oil and set the underbrush alight, small fires at first, then larger ones that danced between the trees, casting grotesque shadows that made every man look like a demon from the old tales. Orhan Sahib urged his mount forward into the heart of it, his own sword singing as he parried a wild swing from a bearded lieutenant of Shahanshah. "Surrender or perish." He bellowed, but the man's eyes were wild with terror, and he fought on until Tarhan's blade ended the argument. Deeper in the melee, the true test of loyalty unfolded. Yakid had been given command of a central company, a position of honor meant to bind him closer, yet in the flickering firelight his hesitation became betrayal made flesh. He held back his men at a critical moment, allowing a pocket of Shahanshah's forces to regroup and counterattack. Orhan Faladios saw it first, his rival's eyes darting toward the enemy lines as if seeking a signal, and the fierce commander's blood boiled hotter than the flames now licking at the pines. "Yakid," Faladios thundered, spurring his horse through the smoke, his voice cutting through the din like a prophet's curse. "Your oath was sworn on the holy book, yet you stand here like a dog waiting for scraps from the tyrant's table." The duel that followed was no mere skirmish, it was the soul of the night laid bare. Yakid turned, his face twisted in defiance and shame, and the 2 men crashed together in a clearing ringed by burning brush. Palladios's blade was a whirlwind of righteous fury, each strike carrying the weight of broken trust. You would sell your brothers for a whisper of gold from Shahanshah's spies. Steel rang against steel, sparks flying into the smoke like dying stars. Yakid fought with the desperation of a man who knew his mask had fallen, his parries growing wilder, his oaths turning to snarls. Authority belongs to the strong, Palladios, not to dreamers like Orhan Sahib who chase ghosts of justice. But Palladios pressed on, his sword finding the gap in Yakid's guard, driving him back against a charred oak whose branches wept embers. The clash drew eyes from both sides, even the enemy paused in their flight to watch, for such a duel was the stuff of legends whispered around future campfires. Orhan Sahib arrived at the edge of the clearing, just as Palladios disarmed his rival with a final ringing blow, sending Yakid's sword spinning into the flames. The traitor fell to his knees, chest heaving, blood streaking his face from a shallow cut above the eye. "Mercy, Orhan Sahib," Yakid gasped, but the words rang hollow, laced with the poison of calculation. Orhan Sahib dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on ash and bone, and stood over the fallen man. The forest around them crackled and roared now, the fires spreading in a great arc that forced the enemy into a narrowing trap. Smoke hung thick as judgment, stinging the eyes and choking the throat, yet Orhan Sahib's voice remained steady, carved from iron and faith. "Mercy is for the penitent, Yakid. You have broken the chain of loyalty that binds us all under the Almighty's gaze. Your fate is not mine to grant, it belongs to the men whose lives you bartered." The psychological storm that followed was as devastating as the steel. Word of the duel spread like the flames themselves through the ranks of Shahanshah's host. Captured soldiers, bound and kneeling in the growing light of dawn, began to murmur among themselves. One, a grizzled sergeant named under the enemy banner, lifted his head and spoke with trembling lips. "Shahanshah promised us glory and gold, yet here we burn while our commander flees. What honor remains?" Orhan Sahib did not gloat, instead he walked among them, his presence alone a greater weapon than any blade. "Lay down your arms," he told them, "not as conqueror but as restorer, and the justice you have been denied will be yours. The tyrant's supply wagons are already cut, your brothers starve while he dines behind stone walls. Choose now, the path of betrayal ends here or it ends in the grave." Many chose surrender. By the time the sun clawed its way above the treetops, the forest floor was littered not only with the fallen but with the discarded banners of Shahanshah trampled and scorched. Tarhan organized the prisoners with quiet efficiency, while Damir Khan and Abdul Rahman secured the perimeter, ensuring no counter-raid could slip through the smoke. Strategic minds turned next to the larger canvas. Orhan Sahib gathered his captains in the smoldering ruins of what had been an enemy forward camp. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulud's, Kilal al-Aliuddin Sahib, Jarkata Sahib, all of them bloodied yet unbroken. The ambush was but the first cut, Orhan Sahib declared, his voice carrying the rhythm of inevitability. Shahanshah's main host retreats toward the river fortress, their wagons burning behind them. We press the encirclement. "Mustafa, you will take 200 and sever the eastern supply road by nightfall. Tamir, Boga, and Mahmud ride west and burn the bridges. Let them taste the hunger they have inflicted upon the innocent." The day that followed was one of relentless pursuit, a slow tightening of the noose that tested the endurance of every soul. Horses foamed and stumbled, yet the warriors pressed on, singing low hymns to the Almighty under their breath, invoking the names of prophets and martyrs to steel their hearts. Orhan Palladios rode at Orhan Sahib's right now, Yakid's former company folded into his own under close watch, their shame a visible chain. The traitor himself was bound and carried in a wagon, his eyes downcast, a living symbol of consequences. As the columns moved through the charred forest into open hills, scouts returned with reports of panic in the enemy ranks. Shahanshah himself had sent frantic riders ahead, ordering retreats that only invited further ambushes. Psychological warfare deepened. Captured messengers were released with messages of their own, scrolls sealed with Orhan Sahib's mark, reading simply, "The night remembers every oath broken. Justice marches." By the second night, the siege lines were drawn around the river fortress, a squat stone bastion that Shahanshah had believed impregnable. Torches ringed the walls in a great circle of fire, smoke rising in pillars that blotted the stars once more. Orhan Sahib stood upon a hastily raised earthen mound, Tarhan at his side, watching the desperate figures on the battlements. Arrows flew from both sides in sporadic exchanges, but the real battle was one of wills. Inside the walls, desperation grew. The defenders knew their supplies were gone, their water tainted by the upstream fires set by Jarkata Sahib's men. A lone voice from the parapet called out under cover of darkness, "Orhan Sahib, spare us, Shahanshah has abandoned us to die." The cry was met with silence at first, then Orhan Sahib's reply, amplified by the night in the echo of stone, "Open the gates before dawn, and no man among you shall taste the blade. Cling to the tyrant, and the flames you see on the horizon will consume you all." The moral confrontation reached its peak in the hours before midnight. Yakid was brought forward, still bound, and forced to stand before the assembled captains. Palladios faced him once more, but this time there was no duel, only the quiet weight of truth. "Look upon what you wrought," Palladios said, his voice thick with sorrow rather than rage. Brothers dead in the forest because your heart turned to dust. Honor is not a cloak you can discard when the wind shifts. Yakid's head hung lower, and for the first time his words carried the tremor of genuine regret. I saw power in shadows and lost the light. Orhan Sahib did not speak to him directly. Instead, he turned to the fortress and raised his hand. The signal was given. A single flaming arrow arced high, and the night erupted anew, not in blind chaos but in calculated fury. Ladders rose against the walls, men swarmed upward under covering fire from archers led by Al-Aliuddin Sahib, and the gates groaned under the ram commanded by Mustafa. The fighting inside the fortress was close and merciless, corridors lit by the same fire and smoke that had turned the forest into legend. Tarhan led the breach, his sword a blur as he cleared a hallway of desperate defenders. "For authority and justice," he cried, and the words became a chant that drowned the screams. Shahanshah's own guard fought to the last in the great hall, but their ruler was nowhere to be found. He had slipped away in the confusion, a desperate flight that left his men broken and cursing his name. By the time the banners of Orhan Sahib flew from the highest tower, the fortress was theirs, yet the cost had been heavy. Wounds on every captain, the smoke still curling from the inner courtyard where a final stand had set tapestries ablaze. In the gray light of the following dawn, Orhan Sahib walked the battlements alone, the wind carrying the scent of victory and ash. The strategic aftermath was clear. Supply lines severed, the enemy hosts scattered into the hills, their morale shattered by the visible proof of betrayal's price. Yet Shahanshah lived, fled to some distant stronghold, his manipulative whispers already seeding new plots among the disloyal. Yakid's fate had been sealed at sunrise, banished to the frontier with nothing but the clothes on his back, a living warning that no man could outrun the consequences of broken oaths. The captains gathered once more, bloodied and weary, yet their eyes burned with the same fire that had carried them through the night. Orhan Sahib turned to them, his voice rising above the murmur of the wind. "We have won this ground, but the war is not ended. Shahanshah's desperation will birth new treacheries, new fires in the dark. Gather your strength, my brothers. We march at dusk toward the eastern passes, where the next fortress awaits and the next shadow of betrayal may already stir." He placed a hand on Tarhan's shoulder, then on Faladios's, drawing them close. "The Almighty has shown us the path through smoke and steel. Honor demands we walk it to the end." As the sun climbed higher, the columns began to form once more, thousands strong, their ranks swollen by those who had chosen justice over fear. Horses stamped impatiently. Wagons creaked under fresh supplies seized from the fallen fortress, and the captains barked orders that echoed like prayers. Yet in the distance a lone rider approached from the hills, cloak torn and face pale, bearing a sealed scroll from an unknown hand. Orhan Sahib took it without a word, broke the wax, and read the message in silence. His expression did not change, but those closest saw the faintest tightening of his jaw, the sign that fate had not yet finished its game. The march would continue, the siege lines would stretch further, and somewhere in the unseen valleys ahead, another betrayal waited to test the unbreakable will of men who fought not for thrones but for the soul of a realm. The wind shifted then, carrying the distant sound of drums from the east, Shahanshah's remnants regrouping, or perhaps a new ally answering his desperate call. Orhan Sahib mounted his horse, raised his blade to the sky, and the host moved forward as one, the forest and the fortress fading behind them like chapters in a book written in blood and fire. The night had spoken its piece. Now the days ahead would write the rest, and every man among them knew that the war, like the smoke that still clung to their cloaks, was far from over. The columns moved eastward under a blood-red sunset, the long shadows of the marching host stretching like fingers across the rolling hills that separated the river fortress from the ancient passes beyond. Orhan Sahib rode at the head, his cloak still stained with the soot and blood of the previous night's victory, yet his posture remained unbent, a living banner of resolve. The air carried the metallic tang of recent battle mixed with the sweeter scent of wild thyme crushed beneath thousands of hooves and boots. Tarhan rode close on his right, ever vigilant, his sharp eyes scanning the ridgelines where ambush might hide. Orhan Faladios commanded the vanguard, his rivalry with the banished Yakid now replaced by fiercer determination to prove loyalty through action. Behind them, the captains Damir Khan, Mahmud, Abdul Rahman, Tamir Boga, Mustafa Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuled's Kilal Al-Aliuddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib maintained tight discipline, their companies moving in disciplined silence broken only by the occasional low invocation to the Almighty for strength and guidance. As the last light faded and the world surrendered once more to darkness, Orhan Sahib signaled the host to make camp in a wide, defensible valley flanked by steep, forested slopes. Fires were kept small and shielded, for the night had become their ally and their enemy alike. He gathered the captains around a single central flame, its light dancing across faces etched with exhaustion yet illuminated by purpose. "Shahanshah has fled like a jackal before the lion," Orhan Sahib began, his voice steady and resonant, carrying the weight of command. "But a wounded beast is most dangerous when cornered. Our scouts report his remnants gathering near the Iron Pass, where the old stone citadel of Karakul stands guard over the eastern trade routes. He will attempt to rally fresh Levies there, perhaps even call upon distant allies who still owe him tribute through fear rather than honor. We cannot allow him breathing room. Tarhan leaned forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. Then we strike before dawn, Orhan Sahib, cut the passes, starve the citadel, and force him into the open where his manipulative tongue cannot hide behind walls. Orhan Sahib nodded slowly, the firelight carving deep shadows across his features. Not yet. First we tighten the noose with strategy, not haste. Mustafa and Tamir Boga take 500 riders each and swing wide through the northern forests. Burn their outlying supply depots and sever the mountain trails that feed Karakul. Let hunger become our silent ally as it did at the river fortress. Abdul Rahman and Damir Khan will hold the southern approach with archers and barricades. The rest of us will press forward at first light, driving the enemy scouts before us like frightened deer. Psychological pressure must precede the steel. Let every captured messenger carry back tales of our mercy to those who surrender, and tales of fire to those who cling to the tyrant. The night deepened as orders were given and men dispersed to their companies. Sleep was brief and restless, haunted by the distant howls of wolves and the occasional far-off cry of an enemy scout who had ventured too close. Before the moon had climbed to its zenith, a small party of riders approached the camp under a white flag, deserters from Shahanshah's broken host, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. They were brought before Orhan Sahib, who received them not with triumph but with measured justice. One, a young officer named under the old banner, knelt and spoke with a voice cracked by thirst and doubt. Great Commander, Shahanshah promises victory with every sunrise, yet we eat roots and watch our brothers fall to fever in the passes. Many within Karakul whisper of laying down arms if mercy is shown. Orhan Sahib studied the man for a long moment, then replied in tones that blended compassion with unyielding authority. The Almighty values the repentant heart. Return to your fellows and tell them this. Open the lesser gates by the third dawn, and no harm shall come to those who swear allegiance anew. But know that betrayal once tasted leaves a bitter mark. Those who choose the path of Yaqid will find only exile or the grave. The deserters were fed, given water, and sent back under escort, their departure sowing seeds of discord within the enemy ranks that would soon bear poisonous fruit. Dawn broke with a heavy mist that cloaked the valleys like a shroud, perfect for the advance. The host moved forward in ordered columns, the forest combat of the previous night giving way to more open, rolling terrain where cavalry could maneuver with deadly effect. Orhan Faladios led the first clash when his vanguard encountered a screening force of Shahanshah's light horsemen attempting to delay the march. The fighting was swift and brutal. Arrows whistled through the mist, followed by the thunder of charging hooves and the clash of steel on steel. Faladios fought at the forefront, his blade a whirlwind as he unhorsed two enemy captains in quick succession, his voice rising above the din. For Orhan Sahib and the justice that does not waver, Tarhan was never far behind, intercepting a deadly arrow meant for Faladios with his own shield, then countercharging to break the enemy's cohesion. As the mist burned away under the rising sun, the true scale of Shahanshah's desperation became visible. The iron pass narrowed ahead, its rocky walls rising like the jaws of some ancient beast, and at its throat stood the citadel of Karakul, massive, brooding, its gray stone walls blackened by centuries of sieges past. Smoke rose from within, not from welcoming hearths but from hurried forges and burning refuse as the defenders prepared for a prolonged stand. Orhan Sahib ordered the encirclement to begin immediately. Altadin Sahib and Zarkin took positions on the high ridges to the north, their archers raining harassment fire upon any movement along the walls. Kulads and Kilul secured the southern slopes, cutting off any attempt at breakout. Jarkata Sahib and Al-Aliuddin Sahib commanded the engineering parties that began constructing siege works, rams, towers, and covered approaches, while Mustafa's riders returned with reports of successful raids on the supply lines, their saddlebags heavy with captured grain and the heads of enemy foragers. The siege settled into a grim rhythm over the following days and nights. Days were filled with the steady thud of axes felling trees for siege engines and the whistle of arrows exchanged across the narrowing gap. Nights brought darker work, small parties slipping through the shadows for raids and sabotage. Tarhan led one such incursion himself, scaling the outer works under cover of a sudden rainstorm that turned the ground to mud and muffled every sound. He and a handful of elite warriors reached the base of the main gate, planting charges of pitch and oil that erupted in a roaring pillar of flame just before dawn, forcing the defenders to expend precious water and manpower to extinguish the blaze. The psychological toll was immense. From the walls, voices called out in despair during the darkest hours. How long must we starve for a ruler who fled the last fortress like a thief? Shahanshah, increasingly desperate within his chambers, responded with harsh measures, executions of suspected disloyal officers that only deepened the rot of fear and resentment. It was on the fifth night of the siege that the next betrayal stirred. A messenger slipped through the lines under cover of darkness, bearing a sealed letter not from Shahanshah but from one of his inner circle, a vizier whose loyalty had always been suspect. The message was brought directly to Orhan Sahib's tent, where he read it by lamplight with Tarhan and Burhan Faladios at his side. The vizier offered to open a postern gate in exchange for safe passage and a position in the new order. Orhan Sahib's face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with the knowledge that such offers often masked deeper traps. This could be genuine desperation, Faladios growled, or another layer of Shahanshah's manipulation. Yaqui taught us the cost of trusting shadowed words. Orhan Sahib weighed the words carefully, then decided on a calculated risk. We will test the offer. Send a small party to the designated gate at midnight tomorrow led by you Faladios with Tarhan's best men in support. If it is true, we take the citadel from within. If it is treachery, we turn their own deception against them and make the night remember their perfidy. The plan was set, and the camp buzzed with quiet anticipation as the appointed hour approached. The night of the attempt arrived, shrouded in thick clouds that swallowed the stars. Faladios and 30 hand-picked warriors approached the postern gate in absolute silence, their bodies smeared with ash to blend with the darkness. Tarhan waited in reserve with a larger force hidden in the rocks below. At the signal, a single faint lantern flashed from the wall. The gate creaked open just enough for the party to slip inside. For a few heart-stopping moments, success seemed certain. Then chaos erupted. The vizier had indeed betrayed Shahanshah, but Shahanshah had anticipated the move and laid a counter-ambush. Defenders poured from hidden alcoves, swords drawn, and the narrow passageway became a slaughterhouse of close-quarters fury. Faladios fought like a man possessed, his blade carving through the press of bodies as he roared. For Orhan Sahib, for justice, steel rang against stone and flesh in a deafening cacophony. Men fell on both sides, the ground growing slick with blood that reflected the torchlight like dark mirrors. Tarhan, hearing the clamor, charged in with his reserves, intercepting arrows and leading a ferocious counterpush that turned the tide. In the heart of the melee, Faladios found himself face to face with one of Shahanshah's elite guard captains, a hulking figure whose loyalty to the tyrant was absolute. Their duel was savage and personal, blades clashing in a shower of sparks within the confined space, each strike carrying the weight of larger fates. Faladios' superior skill and righteous fury eventually prevailed, his final thrust ending the guard captain's life just as Tarhan's men secured the gate fully. With the postern open, the main host surged forward. Orhan Sahib led the central assault himself, his voice rising above the roar of battle like a clarion call. The citadel falls tonight. Let the fires of justice purge the corruption within. The fighting spilled into the courtyards and corridors, a chaotic storm of smoke from burning barracks and the screams of men locked in mortal struggle. Mustafa and Abdul Rahman cleared the outer walls, while Damir Khan and Mahmud swept the lower levels. Shahanshah, realizing the end was near, attempted one final desperate flight through a hidden tunnel, but Jarkata Sahib's men had already blocked it, forcing the tyrant into a corner of his own great hall. There, in the flickering light of overturned braziers and hanging tapestries beginning to catch flame, Shahanshah stood surrounded by his last loyalists, his once regal robes torn and his face pale with the realization that manipulation had its limits. Orhan Sahib entered the hall with Tarhan and Faladios at his flanks, his sword still dripping from the fighting outside. The two rulers, one seeking justice, the other clinging to power, faced each other across the bloodied floor. Shahanshah's voice, once smooth and commanding, now cracked with desperation. Orhan Sahib, we can still reach terms. Share the authority, divide the lands. There is no need for further blood. Orhan Sahib's reply was calm yet laced with the iron of unshakable conviction. Your terms are the language of tyrants who have already lost. You sowed betrayal and reaped the whirlwind. The Almighty's justice does not bargain with those who have broken every oath. Lay down your arms and your life may be spared for judgment before the people you have wronged. Shahanshah hesitated, his eyes darting for any last escape, but the ring of steel closing and left no path. One by one, his remaining guards lowered their weapons, the fight draining from them as the reality of defeat settled like heavy smoke. Yet as the citadel fell and the banners of Orhan Sahib rose over Karakul, a final shadow lingered. In the confusion of the victory, a lone rider escaped through a forgotten sally port, Shahanshah's most trusted spy, carrying word to distant provinces and perhaps to new allies in the west. Captured documents revealed hints of a larger conspiracy, one that reached beyond the passes into realms where old grudges still smoldered. Yaqid's banishment had not ended the poison, it had merely scattered the seeds. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest tower as the first light of dawn touched the stone, the valley below filled with the sounds of the victorious host securing their prize. The war had claimed another stronghold, but the manipulative shadow of Shahanshah still moved in the distance, plotting fresh treacheries. Tarhan approached, wiping blood from his blade, and spoke quietly. The citadel is ours, Orhan Sahib, but the horizon darkens with new storms. Orhan Sahib gazed eastward, where the mountains rose like silent sentinels guarding unknown fates. Then we march again at dusk, gather the captains. The next betrayal awaits, and we shall meet it with steel, faith, and the unyielding will that has carried us through fire and night. The realm will know justice, even if the path is paved with smoke and the bones of the faithless. The host began to stir once more, preparing for the long march ahead. Drums rolled low and steady, horses were saddled, and the captains shouted orders that echoed off the captured walls. Yet in the distance, faint signals of smoke rose from distant peaks, signs that Shahanshah's remnants were already regrouping, calling for aid from powers that had long watched the conflict with hungry eyes. The war was not over, it had only entered a new, more dangerous chapter where every shadow might hide a knife and every oath carried the risk of breaking. And so the columns moved forward again, leaving Karakul behind but carrying its lessons in their hearts. That authority is won not in a single night but through endless vigilance, that justice demands sacrifice, and that the fires of betrayal can be quenched only by the greater flame of unshakable honor. The eastern passes beckoned, dark and foreboding, promising new forests of ambush, new sieges under smoke-filled skies, and new moral reckonings that would test the soul of every man who followed Orhan Sahib toward an uncertain dawn. The night had spoken again, and history itself marched with them into the unknown, its voice a continuous whisper of fate, steel, and the eternal struggle between light and shadow. The columns pressed onward from the smoking heights of Karakul as twilight bled across the eastern passes, painting the jagged peaks in hues of bruised purple and dying gold. Orhan Sahib rode at the forefront once more, his silhouette etched against the fading light like a figure carved from the very stone of destiny. The air grew thinner and colder with every mile gained, carrying the sharp bite of pine and the faint, acrid memory of distant fires. Behind him stretched the host, thousands of weary yet resolute warriors, their armor dulled by dust and blood, their banners fluttering like silent prayers to the Almighty. Orhan remained his constant shadow, eyes never resting, hand never far from his blade. Orhan Faladios commanded the vanguard with renewed fire, the victory at the citadel having only sharpened his edge against any whisper of disloyalty. The captains rode in tight formation, Damir Khan and Mahmud guarding the flanks, Abdul Rahman and Tamir Boga overseeing the supply trains now swollen with captured grain, Mustafa directing the scouts who probed every ravine and goat track ahead, while Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib maintained the rear, and the discipline that kept the column from fraying under the strain of endless march. As full night descended, the host made camp in a narrow, bowl-shaped valley ringed by towering cliffs that seemed to lean inward like watchful giants. Fires were lit sparingly, their glow shielded by woven screens of branches and hides, for in these high passes the wind carried sound and light farther than any man wished. Orhan Sahib convened his inner council beneath a solitary ancient cedar whose branches groaned in the gusts. The flame before them flickered low, casting long shadows that danced across faces marked by fresh scars and older burdens. The fall of Karakul has broken Shahanshah's spine in these mountains, Orhan Sahib spoke, his voice deep and measured, carrying the cadence of one who had stared into the abyss of betrayal and emerged with clearer sight, yet a serpent without a head still writhes. Our scouts bring word that the tyrant has fled toward the fortress city of Varan, nestled in the fertile plains beyond the passes. There he seeks to rally the western Levis, the mountain tribes who once paid him tribute through fear, and perhaps even emissaries from distant powers who smell weakness and opportunity. We must deny him time to weave new webs of manipulation. Tarhan spoke first, his tone edged with the practicality of a man who had intercepted death many times. Then we force the pace, Orhan Sahib, strike the trails before him, cut the roads to Varan, and let hunger and doubt do half the work before our blades finish it. Orhan Faladios nodded, his eyes reflecting the fire like twin coals. And watch for the shadows within. Yakid's ghost still lingers in the hearts of the wavering. One more betrayal could unravel what we have built in blood and smoke. Orhan Sahib raised a hand, silencing further debate with quiet authority. Strategy and vigilance shall be our shields. Mustafa, take 300 of the swiftest riders and ride ahead through the lesser passes. Burn every bridge and depot that feeds Varan. Tamir Boga and Abdul Rahman will follow with the heavy infantry to secure the main trail. Damir Khan and Mahmud, you will sweep the ridges and ensure no enemy scout slips through to warn the city. The rest of us will push forward at first light, driving the enemy before us like leaves before the storm. Let every released prisoner carry the message. Mercy awaits those who open their hearts to justice, but fire and steel claim those who cling to the tyrant's fatting star. The council dispersed into the night, each captain to his duty. Sleep came fitfully for many, disturbed by the howl of mountain wolves and the occasional distant clash of steel as forward patrols engaged lone enemy riders. Before midnight, a small group of mountain tribesmen approached the camp under torchlight, their faces weathered by wind and hardship. They were brought before Orhan Sahib, who received them with the respect due to men who knew the harsh ways of these peaks. Their leader, a grizzled chieftain with braided beard and eyes like chipped flint, spoke plainly. Shahanshah has bled our villages dry with taxes and taken our sons for his wars. We have watched your march, Orhan Sahib. If your justice is true, we will guide your scouts through hidden trails that even his spies do not know. Orhan Sahib studied the man for a long moment, weighing honor against risk, then replied with the gravity the moment demanded. The Almighty rewards the upright. Guide us faithfully, and your people shall share in the peace we bring. Betray us, and the mountains themselves will witness your regret. The tribesmen were given food and shelter, and by dawn they had proven their word, leading small parties of Mustafa's riders along forgotten paths that allowed silent encirclement of enemy outposts. The advance through the passes became a symphony of endurance and calculated violence. Days blended into one another under skies that alternated between piercing sun and sudden, drenching rains that turned trails to rivers of mud. Forest combat returned in the denser stretches of woodland that clung to the lower slopes. Ambushes sprung from behind moss-covered boulders. Chaotic melees where swords rang against shields and men grappled in the undergrowth while arrows whistled overhead. Orhan excelled in these moments, his blade flashing as he led counter-charges that broke enemy lines before they could fully form. In one such clash, deep within a narrow defile choked with ancient pines, Orhan Faladios found himself locked in fierce close quarters fighting against a band of Shahanshah's elite mountain guards. The air filled with the crash of steel and the grunts of exhausted men, the ground slick with blood and fallen needles. Faladios fought with unyielding fury, his voice rising above the din. Your loyalty is to a fallen star, turn now or perish in the shadows. One duel stood out in that shadowed glen, a personal reckoning between Faladios and a towering enemy captain who had once ridden beside Yakid in happier days. Their blades met in a storm of sparks and ringing steel, each strike carrying echoes of past betrayals and present stakes. The enemy captain snarled through gritted teeth, Shahanshah will rise again, and traitors like you will hang from these peaks. Faladios parried and countered with lethal precision, his final blow driven by the memory of fallen brothers. Then rise he may, but not on the bones of the faithful. The captain fell, and with his defeat the enemy line shattered, allowing the host to push forward once more. As the passes began to widen and the land sloped downward toward the plains, the strategic noose tightened. Supply lines to Varan were severed one by one, bridges burned, granaries put to the torch under cover of night, foragers driven off or captured. Psychological warfare deepened with every passing hour. Captured messengers were released after hearing Orhan Sahib's words spoken directly. The tyrant's promises are dust on the wind. Those who lay down their arms will find justice and restoration. Those who persist in blindness will find only the grave and the judgment of the Almighty. Whispers spread through the enemy ranks like wildfire in dry grass, desertions increased, morale crumbled, and within Varan itself, the gates grew heavier with fear. The fortress city of Varan rose before them on the 5th day beyond the passes, a sprawling bastion of gray stone and high towers overlooking fertile fields now trampled and scorched by retreating forces. Smoke curled from its chimneys and forges, but also from hastily erected barricades and burning suburbs, where Shahanshah's men had set fire to anything that might aid the approaching host. Orhan Sahib ordered the full encirclement to commence immediately. The host spread like a great crescent around the city's walls, cutting off every road and river approach. Altadin Sahib and Zarkin took the northern heights with siege engines under construction, their hammers ringing day and night. Kulads and Kilil secured the southern riverbanks, controlling the water that fed the city's wells. Jarkata Sahib and Al-Aliuddin Sahib directed the digging of trenches and the raising of earthen ramps, while Mustafa's riders patrolled the perimeter, intercepting any attempt at breakout or reinforcement. The siege of Varan settled into a tense, grinding rhythm that tested the soul as much as the body. Days were marked by the ceaseless thud of catapults hurling stones and flaming pitch, the whistle of arrows, and the occasional desperate sortie from the gates that ended in bloody repulses. Nights brought stealth and terror, small raiding parties slipping through sally ports or over walls to burn granaries or assassinate key officers. Orhan led several such raids, moving like a ghost in the darkness, his blade claiming lives before alarms could fully sound. In one harrowing night, a sudden counter-raid by Shahanshah's remaining loyalists nearly reached Orhan Sahib's command tent, only to be turned back by the swift intervention of Orhan Faladios and a handful of elite guards. The fighting was savage and intimate, steel flashing in the firelight of overturned braziers, men grappling in the mud while shouts of "for justice" and desperate curses filled the air. Inside the city, Shahanshah's desperation reached new depths. He paced the halls of his palace like a caged lion, issuing increasingly erratic orders, executions of suspected plotters, forced conscriptions of the old and young, promises of gold and land to any who would hold the walls. Yet loyalty frayed. A high-ranking captain within the city, once a close confidant, sent a secret emissary under cover of darkness offering to open the main gates in exchange for amnesty. Orhan Sahib received the offer with the same measured caution he had shown before. "We have seen the face of false promises," he told Orhan and Faladios in the privacy of his tent, the oil lamp casting stark shadows. "But opportunity must sometimes be seized even when wrapped in risk. Prepare a force. If the gate opens, we flood the city. If it is a trap, we make the night itself their executioner." The chosen night arrived cloaked in heavy clouds and driving rain that turned the ground to a quagmire. Faladios led the assault party toward the designated gate, Tarhin covering with a larger reserve hidden in the orchards beyond the walls. At the prearranged signal, a single lantern swung 3 times. The massive wooden gates groaned open just enough for the warriors to pour inside. For precious moments, victory seemed at hand. Then the trap sprang. Shahanshah had anticipated the betrayal and filled the entry courtyard with his most fanatical guards. Arrows rained from above, and the narrow streets became killing grounds of chaos and smoke as buildings were set alight to illuminate the intruders. The fighting that erupted was among the fiercest yet. Close-quarters carnage where swords, daggers, and even bare hands decided fates in the flickering glare of burning rooftops. Faladios fought at the center, his blade a blur of righteous wrath as he carved a path deeper into the city, roaring invocations to the Almighty that rallied his men even as casualties mounted. Tarhin charged in with the reserves, his shield deflecting arrows while his sword felled foe after foe. In the heart of the maelstrom, a personal duel unfolded between Faladios and one of Shahanshah's most feared enforcers, a scarred giant who had personally carried out many of the tyrant's cruel edicts. Their clash echoed off the stone walls, steel screaming against steel in a deadly dance that symbolized the larger struggle: honor against tyranny, justice against manipulation. Faladios prevailed through superior skill and unyielding will, his final strike ending the enforcer's life just as the main host breached other sections of the wall. Orhan Sahib entered the city at the head of the central column as the defenses crumbled. His voice rose above the roar of battle like a beacon. Varan is fallen, let justice reign where fear once ruled. Spare those who surrender, but show no mercy to those who raise arms in the tyrant's name. The streets ran with the chaos of street-to-street fighting, smoke billowing from torched barracks and the screams of the defeated mingling with the triumphant cries of the faithful. Shahanshah, cornered in his inner citadel, attempted one final desperate stand surrounded by his dwindling guard. When Orhan Sahib's forces finally breached the palace gates, the tyrant was found not in regal defiance but in panicked flight toward a hidden escape tunnel, only to find it already blocked by Jarkata Sahib's men. In the grand audience hall, lit by the flames of its own burning tapestries, Shahanshah faced Orhan Sahib at last. The manipulative ruler, his fine robe singed and torn, his face gaunt with exhaustion and rage, spat his final words. You think this ends with me, Orhan Sahib? Powers greater than you stir in the west. My fall will only birth new wars. Orhan Sahib regarded him with calm, unyielding eyes, his voice carrying the moral weight of every oath kept and every betrayal punished. Your reign of shadows ends here. The Almighty's justice is patient but certain. You will answer for the blood you have spilled and the loyalties you have shattered. Shahanshah was taken into custody, his remaining loyalists disarmed, and the city secured amid the dying echoes of battle. Yet as dawn broke over Varan, revealing streets littered with the fallen and banners of justice flying from every tower, a new shadow emerged. Scouts reported a large force approaching from the western plains, reinforcements summoned by Shahanshah's earlier desperate calls, perhaps allied with foreign powers who saw opportunity in the chaos. Captured documents spoke of a greater conspiracy, one that reached far beyond the fallen city, hinting at old rivals and new betrayals stirring in distant courts. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest battlement as the sun climbed, the wind tugging at his cloak. Tarhin and Barhin Faladios joined him, their faces marked by fresh wounds yet their spirits unbroken. The city is ours, Tarhin said quietly, but the war stretches onward. The western host will reach us within days. Orhan Sahib gazed toward the horizon, where dust clouds already hinted at the approaching storm. Then we prepare, gather the captains, fortify Varan, rally the people to our cause, and ready the host for the next march. Justice does not rest when tyrants fall, it only grows stronger in the hearts of those who have tasted freedom from fear. The fires we have lit will not be easily extinguished, and the next betrayal will meet an even firmer resolve. The host stirred once more within the captured city, repairing walls, tending the wounded, and preparing supplies for the battles yet to come. Drums began to roll again, low and steady, calling men to new duties. Yet in the distance, the faint glint of armor and the rumble of approaching hooves signaled that the shadow of Shahanshah had not died. It had merely transformed, spawning fresh treacheries in the west. The war continued, its chapters written in smoke, steel, and the unyielding faith of men who marched not for glory alone, but for the soul of a realm long denied true authority and justice. And so the story pressed forward into uncertain dawn, the night's lessons carried in every heart, that loyalty is tested in fire, that strategy outlasts brute force, and that the path of honor, though dark and perilous, leads toward a light that no manipulator can forever obscure. The columns would march again soon into new forests of ambush, new sieges under smoke-filled skies, and new moral reckonings that would forge the future in the crucible of fate itself. The sun had barely crested the eastern hills when the first dust clouds appeared on the western horizon, heavy and ominous, like the breath of some ancient beast stirring from long slumber. Varan's newly raised banners of justice fluttered defiantly above the repaired battlements, yet every man within the city felt the shift in the wind. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest tower, cloak billowing, his gaze fixed on the approaching storm. The air carried the distant rumble of thousands of hooves and the faint metallic clink of armor that only a large host could produce. Tarhan was at his side, silent and watchful, while Burhan Faladios paced the parapet like a caged wolf, his hand never leaving the hilt of his sword. The captains had gathered below in the great square: Damir Khan, Mahmud, Abdul Rahman, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib, all bloodied from the fall of the city yet burning with the same unquenchable fire that had carried them through forest, pass, and siege. Orhan Sahib descended to address them, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the morning clamor like a blade through silk. "The tyrant's shadow has not vanished with his capture," he declared, eyes sweeping across the assembled faces. "Shahanshah's desperate calls have borne fruit. A great host marches from the western plains, Levi's from the borderlands, mountain tribes bought with gold or fear, and perhaps even foreign spears whose masters see our rise as a threat to their own ambitions. They come not merely to rescue a fallen ruler, but to crush the flame of justice before it spreads. We have won Varan, but the real test begins now." He turned to the captains, assigning roles with the precision of a master strategist who had learned the cost of haste in blood and smoke. "Mustafa, take 400 of the swiftest riders and strike deep into their left flank. Burn their supply trains and sow chaos in the rear. Tamir Boga and Abdul Rahman will fortify the southern approaches with archers and barricades. Damir Khan and Mahmud secure the river crossings to the north and deny them water. Altuddin Sahib and Zarkin will command the siege engines we have turned outward. Let stones and fire greet them before they reach the walls. Kuleds and Kilal hold the eastern gates as reserve. Jarkata Sahib and Al-Aliaddin Sahib will lead the mobile companies that can reinforce wherever the line buckles. Burhan Faladios and Tarhan, you ride with me at the center. We will meet their vanguard in the open field before the walls and break their will before they can encircle us." The host moved with practiced efficiency. By midday, the western plains before Varan had transformed into a vast chessboard of steel and banners. The enemy host, perhaps 12,000 strong, advanced in dense columns, their armor glinting under the harsh sun, drums beating a slow, menacing rhythm that echoed across the fields. At their head rode not Shahanshah himself, still imprisoned within the city, but his most cunning general, a tall, hawk-faced man named Kargan Bey, known for his manipulative tongue and ruthless tactics. Black banners with the old tyrant's sigil fluttered above them, and the air grew thick with the dust of their passage. The first clash came as the sun reached its zenith. Mustafa's riders struck the enemy's supply train like lightning from a clear sky, setting wagons ablaze and scattering drovers in panic. Smoke rose in thick pillars, visible for miles, sowing fear and confusion in the enemy rear. At the same moment, Orhan Sahib led the central charge from the gates of Varan. The ground trembled beneath thousands of hooves as the two vanguards collided in a thunderous crash of steel and flesh. Tarhan was everywhere at once, intercepting arrows with his shield, leading small wedges that punched holes in the enemy line, his voice a rallying cry, "For Orhan Sahib, for the justice that does not yield." In the heart of the melee, Burhan Faladios sought out worthy foes, his blade singing through the chaos. The fighting was open and ferocious, cavalry charges breaking against infantry squares, arrows darkening the sky, men and horses falling in tangled heaps. Smoke from the burning supply wagons drifted across the battlefield, turning day into a gritty twilight and making every shadow a potential threat. Close quarters combat erupted wherever formations buckled, swords clashing, spears thrusting, shields splintering under relentless blows. The air filled with the screams of the wounded, the neighing of terrified horses, and the constant invocations to the Almighty that rose from Orhan Sahib's ranks like a holy storm. Pivotal moment arrived when Kargan Bey committed his elite reserve, a heavy cavalry unit that thundered toward Orhan Sahib's center in an attempt to break the line and reach the city gates. Orhan Sahib saw the danger and countered instantly, ordering a feigned retreat that drew the enemy deeper into a prepared trap. As the heavy riders pursued, Damir Khan and Mahmud's forces struck from the flanks, while archers under Altuddin Sahib rained death from the heights. The trap closed with brutal efficiency. The enemy cavalry found itself encircled, horses rearing in panic as steel closed in from all sides. In the swirling smoke and dust, a fierce personal duel unfolded between Burhan Faladios and one of Kargan Bey's chief lieutenants, a massive warrior whose loyalty to the old regime was absolute. Their blades met in a whirlwind of sparks and ringing steel amid the press of bodies, each strike carrying the weight of larger fates. Faladios fought with the memory of every fallen brother and every betrayed oath, his voice rising above the din. "Your master's time is ended. Turn or die in the dust of his lies." The duel ended with Faladios's blade finding the gap in the lieutenant's armor, and with that fall, the enemy reserve broke, fleeing in disorder. As the afternoon wore on, the battle turned decisively. Mustafa's raids in the rear had left the enemy host hungry and disorganized, their morale cracking under the dual pressure of steel and psychological torment. Captured soldiers brought before Orhan Sahib on the field spoke with trembling voices of growing dissent. Kargan Bey promises victory, yet we starve while he feasts on false hopes. Many among us question the cause for which we bleed. Orhan Sahib offered them the same measured mercy he had shown before. Lay down your arms and swear to the path of justice. The Almighty forgives the repentant. Cling to the old tyranny and the grave will claim you. Hundreds surrendered on the spot, their defection spreading like ripples through the remaining ranks and further eroding Kargan Bey's control. By dusk, the enemy host was in full retreat, leaving behind hundreds of dead and wounded, burned wagons, and shattered banners trampled into the blood-soaked earth. Orhan Sahib did not pursue immediately. Instead, he ordered the lines reformed and the wounded tended, knowing that exhaustion could undo even the sweetest victory. That night, as fires burned low across the battlefield and the moans of the injured filled the darkness, the captains gathered once more in Varan's great hall. Shahanshah remained imprisoned in the deepest cells, his presence a constant reminder of the cost of unchecked ambition. Yet new intelligence brought by scouts painted a darker picture. Kargan Bey had not been destroyed, only bloodied, and he was already regrouping in the western hills, sending riders to summon even larger forces from distant provinces and foreign courts. Whispers spoke of a grand alliance forming against the rising power of Orhan Sahib, one fueled by fear of the justice he represented. Orhan Sahib listened to the reports in silence, then rose to address his inner circle, his voice carrying the rhythmic weight of destiny. We have won the field before Varan, but the war stretches farther than any single battle. The manipulative shadows that serve Shahanshah now seek new masters. Tomorrow we consolidate our gains, fortify the city, and prepare for the next march. The western plains must be secured village by village, road by road. Justice cannot stop at these walls, it must flow outward like a cleansing river. The following days were a blur of relentless activity. Repair parties worked day and night on Varan's walls while mobile columns under Tarhin and Faladios swept the surrounding countryside, rooting out pockets of resistance and winning the hearts of the common folk with fair treatment and the restoration of stolen lands. Psychological warfare continued through released prisoners who carried tales of mercy and warnings of fire. Yet beneath the surface, new betrayals stirred. One of the recently surrendered captains, a man named Sargon who had once ridden with Kargan Bey, was discovered secretly communicating with enemy scouts. The confrontation came at midnight in the city's inner courtyard, lit only by torches and the cold moonlight. Orhan Faladios dragged the traitor before Orhan Sahib, his face twisted in disgust. Another Yakid, Faladios growled. His tongue still drips with the old poison. Orhan Sahib faced the man with calm authority, the moral weight of his words heavier than any blade. You were given mercy and a chance to walk the path of honor. Instead, you chose the shadows once more. What say you before justice claims its due? Sargon's defiance crumbled under the gaze of the assembled captains, and he confessed in a broken voice. Kargan Bey promised me command and gold if I opened a gate from within. The traitor's fate was swift and public, banishment rather than execution, but stripped of all rank and sent into the wilderness as a living warning that loyalty once broken could never be fully mended. As the week drew to a close, the true scale of the new threat became clear. Scouts returned with urgent reports. Kargan Bey had linked with a large contingent of foreign mercenaries, hardened warriors from the western steppes whose loyalty was bought with gold and plunder. Their combined force now numbered nearly 20,000 and was marching directly toward Varan once more, this time with siege engines of their own and a determination born of desperation and greed. The plains would soon run red again. Orhan Sahib stood upon the battlements as the sun set on the seventh day, the distant dust clouds already visible on the horizon like the approach of fate itself. Tarhin and Burhan Faladios flanked him, the captains gathered below in disciplined ranks. The night approaches once more, Orhan Sahib said, his voice rising with the rhythmic power of unyielding conviction, and with it comes fire, smoke, and the test of our souls. We have come through forest ambushes, mountain passes, sieges, and open battle. We have punished betrayal and rewarded loyalty. Now we face the greatest storm yet. Prepare the host, fortify every approach. Let every man remember why we fight, not for thrones or gold, but for the justice that the Almighty demands and the honor that cannot be broken. He raised his blade to the darkening sky, and a great cry rose from the assembled warriors, invocations to the divine, oaths of loyalty, and the deep resolve of men who had walked through smoke and emerged stronger. The drums began to roll again, low and steady, calling the host to new positions. Fires were lit along the walls, their glow reflecting off polished steel and determined faces. In the distance, the enemy host drew closer, their own fires dotting the plains like a sea of malevolent stars. The war had entered a new, darker chapter, one where the stakes stretched beyond Varan to the very soul of the realm. New forests of ambush awaited in the western valleys, new sieges would test the walls and the wills behind them, and fresh betrayals would rise like weeds in untended soil. Yet Orhan Sahib and his faithful captains stood ready, their path illuminated by faith, strategy, and the unquenchable flame of justice. As the first stars appeared overhead, the night deepened, wrapping the city and the plains in its velvet cloak. The wind carried the distant sound of enemy drums, a low thunder that promised chaos and moral reckoning. But within Varan, the hearts of the defenders beat with a different rhythm, one of destiny, honor, and the certain knowledge that the fires they had kindled would not be easily extinguished, no matter how vast the shadow that marched against them. The march of history continued, its voice a continuous dramatic monologue of steel and smoke, of oaths kept and broken, of night battles and dawn victories. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, the next chapter waited, bloodier, more treacherous, yet filled with the promise that true authority, once claimed in the name of justice, could never be fully undone. The night before the great storm broke was one of unnatural stillness over the plains of Varan. The stars hung cold and distant above the city walls, while below thousands of fires burned in disciplined rings, Orhan Sahib's host standing vigil like a wall of living flame against the encroaching darkness. Orhan Sahib walked the battlements alone at first, his cloak heavy with the dew of midnight, then joined by Turhan and Burhan Faladios. The three men stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the faint, rhythmic thud of enemy drums rolling across the plains like the heartbeat of some colossal, malevolent beast. In the distance, the campfires of Kargan Bey's combined host stretched for miles, a sea of orange stars that promised fire, smoke, and the raw test of wills. Orhan Sahib spoke at last, his voice low yet carrying the weight of mountains. They come not merely for vengeance, but to strangle the future before it draws breath. Kargan Bey brings foreign spears and bought loyalties, thinking gold can purchase what honor has already denied him. But we have walked through forests of ambush, passed through the jaws of mountains, taken citadels by night and cities by storm. The Almighty has guided our blades thus far, he will not abandon us now. Turhan nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his ever-ready sword. Then let the dawn bring steel, Orhan Sahib, I will stand where the arrows fly thickest and turn death aside as I have done before. Burhan Faladios gripped his blade tighter, eyes burning with the memory of every duel and every betrayal punished. And I will carve the path through their center, let them taste the same fire we brought to Karakul and Varan. By the time the first gray light touched the eastern sky, the enemy host was already in motion. 20,000 strong, they advanced in three great columns, Kargan Bey commanding the center with his foreign mercenaries forming an iron core of heavy infantry and steppe horsemen. Black banners snapped in the morning wind, and the air filled with the low chant of war drums mixed with the harsh calls of commanders. Orhan Sahib had arrayed his forces with masterful precision. The main line stood before the walls of Varan, reinforced by fresh Levi's from the liberated countryside who had chosen justice over fear. Flanking forces under Damir Khan and Mahmud waited hidden in the low hills to the north, while Mustafa and Tamir Boga prepared lightning strikes against the enemy rear. Abdul Rahman commanded the archers along the walls and earthen ramparts, their bows already nocked. Altuddin Sahib and Zarkin oversaw the siege engines now turned outward, loaded with stones and pots of pitch. Qulads, Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib held the reserves, ready to reinforce any breach. The battle opened with a thunderous charge. Kargan Bey's vanguard crashed against Orhan Sahib's center in a storm of steel and dust. The ground shook beneath the weight of thousands of warriors. Swords rang against shields, spears thrust and splintered, horses screamed as they fell. Smoke began to rise almost immediately as flaming arrows from both sides set grass and abandoned wagons ablaze. Within minutes, the battlefield transformed into a chaotic hell of close-quarters combat, men grappling in the dirt, blades flashing red, voices rising in desperate oaths and cries for mercy that went unanswered. Turhan was a whirlwind in the thick of it. An arrow whistled toward Orhan Sahib. He intercepted it with his shield, then drove forward with a small wedge of elite swordsmen, cutting deep into the enemy line. For Orhan Sahib in the righteous path, he roared, his blade rising and falling with merciless precision. Nearby, Burhan Faladios led a ferocious countercharge, his company smashing into a formation of foreign mercenaries. The fighting there was especially brutal, steppe warriors in heavy lamellar armor meeting the curved blades of the faithful in a grinding press of bodies. Faladios dueled three men in rapid succession, each clash more savage than the last, his voice cutting through the din like a prophet's curse. Your gold will not buy you salvation, turn now or feed the crows. In the swirling smoke and chaos, a pivotal personal duel emerged. Kargan Bey himself rode forward with a guard of chosen champions, seeking to break the center and reach Orhan Sahib. Faladios met him head-on. The two commanders clashed in a clearing momentarily carved by the press of battle, their horses circling as blades sang. Kargan Bey was a master of manipulation and steel alike, his strikes precise and venomous. You fight for a dreamer, he snarled across the gap between them. Orhan Sahib's justice is a lie that will die with him today. Faladios answered with righteous fury, parrying a vicious overhead blow and countering with a thrust that drew first blood. Your tongue has always been sharper than your honor, Kargan Bey. Today both will be silenced. The duel raged for long, heart-stopping moments, sparks flying, horses rearing, the surrounding melee seeming to slow as all eyes turned to the contest of champions. Faladios's superior skill and burning conviction finally prevailed. His blade found the gap beneath Orhan Bey's arm, driving deep. The enemy general toppled from his saddle with a strangled cry, and with his fall, a visible wave of despair rippled through the central column. Yet the battle was far from decided. The foreign mercenaries, hardened by distant wars and paid in gold, fought on with grim determination. They pushed forward in dense squares, their long spears creating a forest of death that threatened to overwhelm Orhan Sahib's lines. Smoke from the burning fields grew thicker, turning the morning into a choking twilight where friend and foe became shadows. Casualties mounted on both sides. Jarkata Sahib fell wounded while leading a desperate stand on the left, his shoulder pierced by a spear, yet he refused to leave the field, shouting orders even as blood soaked his tunic. Al-Aliaddin Sahib took command of the reserve and committed them at the critical moment, stabilizing the line just as it began to buckle. From the walls, Abdul Rahman directed a devastating barrage of arrows and catapult fire that rained death into the enemy rear. Mustafa and Tamir Boga struck then with devastating effect, sweeping around the flanks like wolves, burning supply wagons and scattering the herds of spare horses. Panic began to spread through Orhan Bey's host. Desertions increased as men remembered the mercy Orhan Sahib had shown at previous battles. Captured warriors, dragged from the press, knelt before the advancing lines and begged for quarter, swearing new oaths on the spot. As the sun climbed toward noon, the tide turned decisively. Orhan Sahib, sensing the moment, raised his sword high and led a general advance. His voice rose above the roar like thunder rolling across the plains. "The Almighty watches, break them now, my brothers, let justice ride with every blade." The entire host surged forward with renewed strength. The enemy center collapsed under the pressure. What had been an ordered advance became a chaotic rout, men throwing down weapons, fleeing toward the western hills, pursued by Orhan's relentless cavalry. Smoke billowed in great clouds as more wagons and abandoned siege engines caught fire, marking the battlefield like funeral pyres. By late afternoon, the plains before Varan belonged once more to Orhan Sahib. Thousands lay dead or wounded, the ground carpeted with broken banners, discarded spears, and the bodies of men who had chosen the wrong side of history. Orhan Bey's body was recovered and brought before Orhan Sahib, a silent testament to the cost of serving tyranny. The surviving enemy commanders surrendered in clusters, their arrogance shattered by the reality of defeat. Orhan Sahib received them not with cruelty but with the same measured justice that had defined his campaign. Those who lay down arms and swear true allegiance will be spared and given a place among the faithful. Those who cling to the old shadows will face the judgment they have earned. That night, as fires burned low across the bloodied field and the wounded were tended within the city, the captains gathered in the great hall of Varan. Shahanshah remained in chains, now joined by several high-ranking prisoners from the day's battle. The mood was one of hard-won triumph mixed with sober awareness. Scouts brought fresh reports even as the victory was celebrated. Remnants of the enemy host had fled westward, carrying word of the defeat to distant provinces. New alliances were already forming. Old rivals of the realm, fearful of Orhan Sahib's rising authority, were said to be mustering forces in the far west and even beyond the borders. Whispers spoke of a grand coalition gathering, one that would dwarf anything yet faced. Orhan Sahib listened to every report, then rose to address his inner circle, his voice carrying the rhythmic depth of a man who saw beyond the immediate triumph. "We have won a great field today, my brothers. The smoke of their defeat still rises to the heavens as a sign, but the war is not ended. The manipulative shadows that once served Shahanshah now spread to new masters. Greater hosts will come. New betrayals will test us. Yet we have proven that faith, strategy, and unyielding honor can overcome numbers and gold. Tomorrow we consolidate Varan, tend our wounded, and prepare the next march. The western provinces must be brought under the banner of justice, village by village, road by road. The realm will know order again, even if the path is paved with fire and the bones of the faithless." He placed a hand on Orhan's shoulder, then on Faladios's, drawing strength from their loyalty. "The night has spoken once more through steel and smoke. Let every man remember why we fight, not for personal glory, but for the justice the Almighty demands and the honor that cannot be bought or broken. Gather your companies, rest while you can. At first light we begin the work of securing what we have won and preparing for what comes next." The captains dispersed to their duties, their faces marked by fresh scars yet illuminated by renewed purpose. Within the city, repairs continued by torchlight. Outside, patrols swept the plains, ensuring no enemy stragglers could regroup nearby. The wounded were carried inside, and the dead, both friend and foe, were given rites according to custom, a solemn reminder of the human cost of every victory. Yet even in the hour of triumph, a new shadow stirred. Late that night, a lone rider approached the gates under a white flag, bearing a sealed message from an unknown hand in the far west. The The scroll spoke not of surrender but of warning and invitation. Distant powers offered parley, hinting at alliances or perhaps deeper treachery. Orhan Sahib read it by lamplight, his expression unchanging, but those closest saw the faint tightening of his jaw, the sign that fate had not yet finished writing its chapter. As the moon climbed high and the plains grew quiet once more, Orhan Sahib stood again upon the battlements, gazing westward into the darkness. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke from the battlefield and the distant promise of new storms. Tarhan joined him, silent as ever. "The war continues," he said quietly. Orhan Sahib nodded, his voice a low, resonant vow into the night. "It does, and we will meet every new betrayal, every new siege, every new field of fire with the same unyielding will. The realm will be cleansed, authority will be restored, justice will prevail, even if the path leads through 1,000 nights of smoke and steel." The host stirred once more within Varan's walls. Drums began their low, steady roll again, calling men to new watches and new preparations. Horses were saddled, blades sharpened, and prayers rose quietly to the Almighty. In the distance, the western horizon remained dark and foreboding, hiding forests yet to be traversed, passes yet to be forced, and sieges yet to be won. The night deepened, wrapping the city and the bloodied plains in its embrace. History itself seemed to pause, breathing, before continuing its epic monologue of honor, betrayal, and the eternal struggle between light and shadow. The war was far from over. New chapters awaited, bloodier, more treacherous, yet filled with the promise that true justice, once kindled, burns brighter than any manipulative flame and cannot be extinguished by the gathered hosts of the desperate and the damned. And so the columns would march again soon, carrying the lessons of every previous night into the unknown, their hearts forged in fire, their blades tempered in faith, and their souls sworn to see the dawn of a realm ruled not by fear, but by the unshakable authority of justice. The moon had barely begun its slow descent when the first scouts returned to Varan's gates, their horses lathered and eyes wide with urgency. They brought word that the remnants of Kargan Bey's shattered host had not simply fled westward, they had linked with a far larger force gathering in the shadowed valleys beyond the river plains. 25,000 strong now, perhaps more, drawn from border tribes, mercenary companies, and opportunistic lords who feared the spread of Orhan Sahib's justice more than they loved the memory of Shahanshah. Their campfires burned like a second horizon, and their drums carried a new, deeper rhythm across the night wind, the sound of men preparing not for rescue, but for total annihilation. Orhan Sahib received the reports in the great hall, surrounded by his captains under the flickering light of iron braziers. The air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of freshly sharpened steel. Shahanshah remained chained in the deepest dungeon, his presence a silent poison that still whispered through the walls. Orhan Sahib stood tall, his face carved with the lines of relentless command, yet his eyes burned with the same unquenchable fire that had carried them through every forest ambush and siege. "Listen well," he said, his voice low and resonant, each word measured like the tolling of a great bell. "The enemy no longer fights merely for a fallen tyrant, they fight against the very idea of justice itself. They come with numbers and gold, believing that steel bought with coin can overcome steel tempered by faith. But we have proven otherwise time and again. The Almighty has opened the path through smoke and night. He will not close it now." He turned to his most trusted captains, assigning roles with the calm precision of a man who had studied every ridge and river for weeks. "Mustafa, take 500 of the swiftest riders and swing wide through the northern forests. Strike their supply columns at dawn and vanish like ghosts. Burn everything they need to sustain a long siege. Tamir Boga and Abdul Rahman will hold the southern river crossings with archers and barricades, deny them water and force them to thirst. Damir Khan and Mahmud will command the high ground to the east, ready to descend like eagles when the moment comes. Altuddin Sahib and Zarkin prepare every siege engine and turn the walls of Varan into a fortress that devours attackers. Khuleds and Killil will lead the mobile reserves. Jarkata Sahib, though wounded, will direct the inner defenses from the towers. Al-Aliaddin Sahib will oversee the wounded and the morale of the people within the city. Barhan Faladios and Tarhan, you ride with me in the center. We will meet their main host on the open plain before they can fully encircle us, and we will break their spirit before their numbers can crush ours. The night passed in a blur of controlled activity. Men repaired armor by torchlight, horses were fed and rested as much as possible, and quiet prayers rose from every corner of the city, invocations to the Almighty for strength, for mercy upon the righteous, and for justice upon the faithless. Before the first hint of gray touched the sky, small raiding parties slipped out under cover of darkness. Tarhan himself led one such group, moving like a shadow through the tall grass, his blade claiming the lives of enemy pickets before alarms could sound. The distant glow of burning wagons soon lit the western horizon, sending the first tremors of fear through the approaching host. Dawn broke red and angry, as if the sky itself bled in anticipation. The enemy army advanced in a vast, rolling tide, dense blocks of heavy infantry at the center, flanked by swarms of light horsemen and siege towers creaking forward on massive wheels. At their head rode not one commander but a council of desperate lords and foreign captains, their banners a patchwork of old loyalties and new greed. The air filled with the thunder of drums, the neighing of horses, and the low chant of war cries. Orhan Sahib led his host out from Varan's gates in perfect formation. The two armies met on the wide plain less than 2 miles from the city walls. The initial clash was cataclysmic. Cavalry charges slammed into infantry lines with bone-shattering force. Arrows darkened the sky like locusts. Within moments the battlefield dissolved into a maelstrom of smoke and chaos as pitch pots and flaming arrows set the dry grass ablaze. The wind whipped the flames higher, turning the morning into a choking, hellish twilight where men fought in shifting pockets of fire and shadow. Tarhan was a living legend in the press. An arrow meant for Orhan Sahib whistled through the smoke. He caught it on his shield and charged forward, leading a wedge of elite swordsmen that punched deep into the enemy center. His blade sang a deadly song, intercepting blows, severing limbs, his voice rising above the roar, "For Orhan Sahib, for the justice that the night itself cannot swallow." Orhan Faladios fought like a man possessed by divine wrath. He led charge after charge against the foreign mercenaries, whose heavy armor and long spears created walls of death. In one savage melee near a burning siege tower, he found himself locked in fierce close-quarters combat with a towering foreign captain, a scarred giant from the western steppes whose loyalty was measured only in gold. Their duel was brutal and intimate, blades clashing in showers of sparks while flames licked at their heels and smoke stung their eyes. The foreigner snarled through bloodied teeth, "Your cause is dust, gold rules this world, not prayers." Faladios answered with a roar that carried every oath he had ever sworn, "Then today gold will buy you only a grave." His superior skill and burning sense of honor prevailed. With a final, powerful thrust he ended the giant's life, and the surrounding mercenaries wavered, their formation cracking under the weight of witnessed defeat. The battle raged for hours. At one critical moment the enemy nearly broke through the left flank, threatening to reach Varan's walls. Jarkata Sahib, despite his wound, directed a desperate defense from the towers, while Al-Aliaddin Sahib committed the last reserves at exactly the right instant. Smoke from the burning grass grew so thick that men could barely see 10 paces ahead. In that blinding chaos, psychological warfare became as deadly as steel. Orhan Sahib ordered captured enemy soldiers released with simple messages: "Lay down your arms and live under justice. Continue this madness and the flames you see will consume you all." The word spread like wildfire through the enemy ranks. Desertions began small at first, then in larger groups, men throwing down weapons and running toward Orhan Sahib's lines with hands raised. By midday the tide had turned. Mustafa's raids in the rear had left the enemy without fresh supplies, their horses weary and their bellies empty. Tamir Boga and Abdul Rahman's archers had turned the river crossings into killing zones. Damir Khan and Mahmud descended from the high ground at the perfect moment, striking the enemy rear like a hammer. The great host that had marched with such arrogance began to disintegrate. What had been an ordered advance became a chaotic rout, men fleeing in all directions, pursued by Tarhan's relentless cavalry and cut down by arrows from the walls. As the sun began its slow descent, Orhan Sahib rode through the smoke and carnage to the center of the field. The enemy commanders who still lived knelt before him, their fine armor dented and bloodied. Among them was a high lord who had once been close to Shahanshah, his face pale, his voice trembling as he spoke. "We were promised easy victory and rich plunder. Instead we have found only fire and the judgment of the Almighty. Spare us, Orhan Sahib, and we will swear new oaths." Orhan Sahib regarded them with calm, unyielding eyes. "Mercy is granted to the repentant, but remember this: betrayal once tasted leaves a mark that never fully fades. Serve justice truly, or the next time your fate will be written in steel rather than words." Many swore allegiance on the spot. Others, those whose hearts remained poisoned, were bound and taken into the city for judgment. That night, as fires burned low across the blood-soaked plain and the wounded were carried within Varan's walls, the captains gathered once more. Victory had been won, but at a heavy cost. Many good men lay dead or maimed. Jarkata Sahib's wound had worsened, and several lesser captains had fallen in the smoke, yet the spirit of the host remained unbroken. Scouts brought fresh intelligence even as the celebration was tempered with caution. The remnants of the great host had fled farther west, carrying tales of defeat that would echo across distant provinces. New powers were stirring, old rival kingdoms and shadowy coalitions that saw Orhan Sahib's rise as an existential threat. Whispers spoke of an even larger army being raised beyond the western mountains, one that would combine the strength of multiple realms and the cunning of manipulators who had learned from Shahanshah's mistakes. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest battlement as the stars emerged, the wind carrying the mingled scents of smoke, blood, and the sweet grass of the plains. Tarhan and Barhan Faladios stood with him, their faces etched with fresh scars yet their eyes bright with resolve. "The field is ours," Tarhan said quietly, but the horizon darkens again. Orhan Sahib gazed westward into the gathering night, his voice rising with the rhythmic power of destiny itself. "Then we will meet the darkness with greater light. Consolidate Varan, tend the wounded, rally the people. Tomorrow we begin the long march westward. Village by village, fortress by fortress, we will bring justice to every corner of the realm. The manipulative shadows that once served Shahanshah now spread like weeds, but we will burn them out with fire and faith. No betrayal will go unpunished. No oath will be allowed to break without consequence. The Almighty has shown us the path through every night of chaos. He will guide us through the ones yet to come." He turned to his captains who had assembled below and raised his blade to the sky. A great cry rose from the host, invocations, oaths of loyalty, and the deep, resonant chant of men who had walked through hell and emerged stronger. Drums began to roll once more, low and steady, calling the warriors to new duties. Horses were saddled, wagons loaded with captured supplies, and prayers continued long into the night. Yet even in this hour of hard-won triumph, a final shadow lingered. Late that night, a captured enemy messenger revealed under questioning that a new conspiracy was already forming, one that reached not only to distant lords, but possibly to figures within Orhan Sahib's own expanding ranks. The name of a previously loyal captain was mentioned in hushed tones, a man who had fought bravely at Karakul but whose eyes had grown distant in recent days. Orhan Sahib listened without expression, then spoke softly into the darkness. "Another test comes. We will face it as we have faced all others, with vigilance, with strategy, and with the unyielding honor that has carried us thus far. The war is not over. It has only grown larger, deeper, and more worthy of the legends that will one day be told around future fires." As the night deepened and the plains grew quiet beneath a canopy of stars, the host of Orhan Sahib prepared for the next chapter. The columns would march again at first light, westward, into new forests where ambushes waited, new passes where strategy would be tested, new fortresses where sieges would rage under pillars of smoke, and new moral reckonings where loyalty would be weighed against temptation. The epic continued, its voice a continuous, dramatic monologue spoken by history itself, of steel flashing in firelight, of oaths sworn and sometimes broken, of nights that tested the soul and dawns that rewarded the faithful. The realm trembled on the edge of transformation, and Orhan Sahib, with Tarhan at his right and Burhan Faladios at his left, marched forward with the captains and the thousands who followed, their hearts sworn to see justice prevail no matter how many nights of chaos and smoke still lay ahead. The war stretched onward, bloodier and more treacherous than before, yet illuminated by the certain knowledge that true authority, once claimed in the name of the Almighty and the honor of the faithful, could never be fully extinguished, only carried forward into the next dawn, the next battle, and the next inevitable confrontation with the shadows that refused to die. The plains before Varan lay silent under a blanket of stars, the fires of the victorious host flickering like distant prayers against the vast darkness. Yet peace was an illusion. Even as the wounded were tended and the dead given rites beneath the cold moon, Orhan Sahib felt the weight of the horizon pressing upon him. The defeated remnants had scattered westward like seeds carried on a bitter wind, and wherever they landed, new alliances were taking root, lords hungry for power, tribes bought with promises, and foreign captains whose eyes gleamed at the thought of plunder in a realm teetering on the edge of transformation. Before the first light of dawn touched the battlements, Orhan Sahib summoned his captains once more to the great hall. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and healing herbs, the torches casting long shadows across faces marked by fresh wounds and older resolve. Shahanshah remained in chains below, a living symbol of fallen tyranny, yet his whispers still seemed to echo through the stone. Orhan Sahib stood at the head of the assembly, his voice steady and deep, carrying the rhythmic cadence of one who spoke not merely as a commander but as the voice of justice itself. "The victory yesterday was written in fire and blood," he began, eyes moving across every captain: Tarhan, Burhan Faladios, Damir Khan, Mahmud, Abdul Rahman, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kilad's Kilal Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and the wounded yet defiant Jarkata Sahib. But the enemy does not die with a single battle. They regroup in the western valleys and beyond the great mountains, calling upon old grudges and new greed. They will come again, larger and more desperate, for the light we carry threatens the shadows in which they have long hidden. We must press westward without delay. We will secure every village, every road, every fortress between Varan and the distant passes. Justice cannot wait behind walls while tyranny breathes in the hills. He laid out the strategy with the calm precision of a man who had studied the land as one studies scripture. "Mustafa, take 600 riders and ride ahead through the western forests. Cut their scouting parties, burn their forward depots, and spread word among the villagers that mercy awaits those who open their hearts. Tamir Boga and Abdul Rahman will follow with the main infantry, securing the roads and river fords. Daimir Khan and Mahmud will command the high ridges, ready to strike from above like the judgment of the Almighty. Altadin Sahib and Zarkin will oversee the siege train and the engineers. Kuleds and Killil will guard the flanks. Jarkata Sahib, though your shoulder weeps blood, your wisdom will command the rear from the wagons. Al-Aliaddin Sahib will remain in Varan with a strong garrison to hold the city and tend the people. Burhan Faladios and Turhan, you ride at my side. We will lead the vanguard and meet whatever treachery awaits in the open or in the shadows. The host stirred before sunrise. Columns formed in the gray light, banners unfurling like promises to the coming day. Prayers rose in low, fervent murmurs, oaths sworn on the holy book, invocations for strength against the faithless and blessings upon the path of justice. As the sun climbed, the long march westward began, the plains giving way to rolling hills thick with ancient forests where ambush could hide behind every tree. The first days passed in a rhythm of vigilance and movement. Scouts clashed in small, sharp encounters along the tree lines, arrows whistling through leaves, steel flashing in sudden clearings, men falling silently so as not to alert larger forces. Turhan led several such skirmishes himself, his blade intercepting death meant for others, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos of close quarters fighting beneath the canopy. Smoke rose from burning enemy outposts, signaling to the villagers that the old order was crumbling. Deeper into the forest, the true test came. An enemy rearguard several thousand strong, commanded by a cunning lord who had escaped the plains, had fortified a narrow defile where the trees grew so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. They waited in ambush, hoping to bleed Orhan Sahib's vanguard and slow the entire host. The clash erupted without warning. Arrows rained from the heights, followed by a savage charge of infantry bursting from the undergrowth. The air filled with the crash of steel, the grunt of men locked in mortal struggle, and the crackle of flames as fallen torches set the dry brush alight. Orhan Faladios plunged into the heart of the melee, his sword a whirlwind of righteous fury. He fought shoulder to shoulder with his men, parrying wild swings, thrusting into gaps, his voice rising like thunder through the smoke. Your loyalty is to dust and greed. Turn to justice or perish in these shadows. In the choking gloom, a fierce personal duel unfolded between Faladios and the enemy lord, a tall, armored figure whose blade carried the desperation of a man who knew his cause was lost. Their steel rang against steel in a deadly dance amid burning branches and trampled ferns. The lord snarled through gritted teeth, Shahanshah will rise again, and your dreamer's justice will burn with him. Faladios answered with unyielding conviction, his strikes growing stronger with every oath remembered. Then rise he may, but not while faithful hearts still beat. With a final, powerful blow, he disarmed his foe and drove him to his knees, the surrounding enemy line shattering as word of their commander's defeat spread. Turhan was never far, intercepting arrows with shield and body, leading countercharges that broke the ambush from within. Mustafa's riders struck the rear at the perfect moment, completing the encirclement and turning the defile into a trap of fire and steel. By the time the smoke cleared and the sun pierced the canopy once more, the enemy force was broken, many dead, more surrendered, and the survivors swearing new oaths before Orhan Sahib as he rode through the clearing. Psychological warfare deepened with every mile gained. Released prisoners carried simple messages to the villages ahead. The night of tyranny ends, open your gates to justice and share in the peace. Cling to the old shadows and the flames will find you. Many heeded the call. Villages surrendered without resistance, their people emerging with tears and prayers, offering food and guides through hidden trails. Yet not all hearts were pure. In one prosperous settlement nestled beside a swift river, a local chieftain feigned loyalty only to send riders under cover of night toward the enemy lines. The betrayal was discovered by Al-Aliaddin Sahib's watchful men back in Varan through intercepted messages, and word reached Orhan Sahib by fast rider. The moral confrontation came at dusk in the village square, lit by torches in the orange glow of the setting sun. The chieftain was brought before Orhan Sahib, bound yet defiant at first. Orhan Faladios stood ready, his hand on his hilt, while Turhan watched with silent intensity. Orhan Sahib spoke not in anger but with the heavy sorrow of one who had seen too many oaths broken. You were offered mercy and a place in the new order. Instead you chose the path of Yaqid in the shadows of Shahanshah. What say you before the Almighty and these witnesses? The chieftain's defiance crumbled under the weight of those words in the eyes of his own people. He confessed in a trembling voice, begging for the mercy he had betrayed. Orhan Sahib granted exile rather than death, stripped of rank and sent into the wilderness as a living warning. But the lesson burned deep into every heart present. Loyalty once offered could not be recalled without consequence. The march pressed onward, the forests giving way to open valleys and then to the foothills of the great western mountains. Strategic thinking guided every step. Supply lines were extended and protected, bridges secured, and high passes scouted in advance. Encirclement became a familiar art, small forces cutting off retreat while the main host advanced inexorably. Nights grew longer and colder, filled with the distant howls of wolves and the occasional clash of forward patrols. Fires were kept low, conversations turned to quiet invocations, and men slept with weapons close at hand. On the 10th night since leaving Varan, a new and greater threat revealed itself. Scouts returned with urgent tidings. A massive enemy army, 30,000 or more, had gathered in a broad valley beyond the next range of peaks. They flew not only the old banners of Shahanshah but new sigils from distant realms, foreign mercenaries swelling their ranks with hardened spears and siege engines dragged by oxen. At their head rode a council of lords, including survivors from previous defeats and new allies drawn by the scent of opportunity. Their camp stretched for miles, smoke from their fires rising like pillars into the night sky. Orhan Sahib received the news without flinching. He gathered the captains beneath a lone cedar on a high ridge, the wind whispering through its branches like the voice of fate. They come in greater numbers, believing quantity can overcome quality, he said, his voice blending into the rustle of leaves. But we have faced greater odds in spirit if not in steel. We will not wait behind walls this time, we will choose the ground. Mustafa and Tamir Boga will swing wide through the northern passes to strike their rear in supplies. Damir Khan and Mahmud will seize the high ridges overlooking the valley. The rest of us will advance at first light and draw them into battle on terrain of our choosing. Let fire and smoke once more turn the day to our advantage. Let every man remember that we fight not for conquest alone, but for the justice that cleanses the realm. As the council ended and men returned to their companies, a quiet tension settled over the host. Orhan Faladios approached Orhan Sahib privately, his voice thick with the memory of past duels. Another shadow stirs within our own ranks, I fear. Whispers reach me of a captain whose counsel grows cautious, whose eyes turn westward too often. Orhan Sahib placed a hand on his shoulder. Watch closely, my brother. Vigilance is the shield of honor. We have punished betrayal before. We will do so again if fate demands it. The night deepened, wrapping the ridges and valleys in its embrace. Prayers continued long after the fires died low, oaths renewed, hearts steeled, fates entrusted to the Almighty. In the distance, the enemy camp glowed like a malevolent dawn, their drums rolling faintly across the wind, promising chaos, fire, and the next great test of wills. Orhan Sahib stood alone for a time on the ridge, gazing toward the west where the mountains rose like silent sentinels guarding unknown chapters. The war had grown vast, stretching across forests, plains, and peaks, yet the path remained clear. Forward, always forward, through smoke and steel, through moral reckonings and strategic mastery, until justice reigned unbroken from one horizon to the other. At first light, the columns would move again, into the valley of decision, where fire would rise once more as a turning point, where personal duels would decide the fate of thousands, and where the next betrayal, if it came, would meet an even firmer resolve. The epic marched onward, its voice unbroken, speaking of honor that could not be bought, loyalty that could not be easily broken, and a night that, no matter how dark, always yielded to the dawn for those who walked the path of the righteous. The realm held its breath. The war was far from over. New sieges awaited, new ambushes in deeper forests, new confrontations that would test the soul of every man who followed Orhan Sahib toward the uncertain but inevitable light of justice. In the deep, suffocating embrace of the night, where the ancient forest of Karadog swallowed all light and hope alike, Orhan Sahib stood motionless beneath the skeletal branches of an ancient oak, his cloak heavy with dew and the weight of unyielding command. The air was thick, alive with the low murmur of hidden streams and the distant, restless stirring of horses tethered in the underbrush. No stars pierced the canopy above. Only the faint, dying glow of a single shielded lantern cast long, wavering shadows across the faces of his captains gathered in silence. The most merciful, whose justice burns brighter than any flame forged by man, Orhan Sahib whispered into the void, his voice a low thunder that carried the sacred oath of every soul sworn to him. We do not march for conquest alone, but for the restoration of honor betrayed and authority stolen in the name of false kings. The night deepened around him as if the forest itself leaned closer to hear the words of a commander who sought not glory, but the divine balance of fate. Orhan, his right hand and the elite swordsman whose blade had turned aside death itself 100 times, stepped forward from the shadows, his armor glinting faintly like the edge of a predator's tooth. Orhan Sahib, he said, his tone sharp yet reverent, the scouts have returned through the thickets. Yaqid, that serpent who once drank from the same cup of brotherhood, has cast his lot with Shahanshah. He rides at the head of their vanguard, whispering lies of our weakness to the enemy's ears. Orhan Sahib's grip tightened on the hilt of his sword, yet his face remained carved from stone, a mask of calculated fury. Then let the night be our ally, he replied, as it was for our fathers before us. We will not chase shadows, we will become them. He turned to the circle of captains, Damir Khan with his scarred face etched by a dozen border wars, Mahmud whose arrows flew truer than any oath, Abdul Rahman the steadfast bearer of the rear guard, Tamir Boga whose voice could rally the faint-hearted, Mustafa the swift rider of the eastern flanks, Altuddin Sahib whose wisdom had saved sieges before they began, Zarkin the silent tracker of hidden paths, Kulid's the bearer of the heavy standard, Kilil whose axes cleaved through armor like parchment, Al-Aliaddin Sahib the keeper of supply lines, and Jarkata Sahib whose cunning had unraveled enemy spies in the past. Together they formed the iron core of justice, bound by blood and the unbreaking word of the Almighty. As the night deepened further, Orhan Sahib laid out the strategy with the precision of a blade being honed. Shahanshah grows desperate in his marble halls, manipulating alliances with gold and fear. His supply wagons crawl through the narrow passes to the south, heavy with grain and powder for the coming siege of our own outposts. We cut them here in the forest's heart. Damir Khan, you will take the left flank with Mahmud's archers and encircle their scouts. Abdul Rahman, hold the rear and ensure no messenger slips back to warn the traitor. Tarhin, you ride with me at the center. Orhan Faladios, my fierce commander whose rivalry with Yakid burns hotter than the forges of hell, will lead the first charge once the ambush springs. We strike not for slaughter alone, but to sow the seeds of fear in their hearts, to make every man among them question the loyalty they have sold. The captains nodded, their eyes gleaming with the fire of righteous purpose. No jests passed their lips, only oaths sworn low and fierce. By the Prophet's name we shall not falter. They moved then, a silent host slipping through the forest like ghosts of vengeance. The undergrowth clawed at their boots, roots twisted like the fingers of fate itself, yet not a single branch snapped under Tarhin's careful step. Hours stretched into the black expanse, the only sound the muffled breath of men and the occasional distant howl of a wolf that seemed to echo their own hunger for justice. Orhan Sahib rode at the fore, his mind weaving the threads of encirclement. We starve them of their lifeblood, he murmured to Tarhin beside him. Supply lines severed, their bellies will turn against Shahanshah before our steel does. Psychological warfare is the first blade, let them taste the fear of abandonment. As the first hints of false dawn teased the eastern sky, though the canopy denied it entry, the scouts signaled. The enemy column approached, Yakid's banner fluttering traitorously among them, flanked by Shahanshah's desperate Levi's. The ambush erupted without warning, as the night itself seemed to shatter. Arrows hissed from the trees like divine judgment, Mahmud's bowmen losing volley after volley that felled horses and men in tangled heaps. For Orhan Sahib in the honor of the realm, cried Tamir Boga, his voice rising above the sudden chaos as he led a wedge of riders crashing into the flank. Steel met steel in the close quarters fury of the forest floor, where branches became weapons and roots claimed the fallen. Orhan Faladios, known also as Faladios in the tongues of those who feared his wrath, charged ahead, his blade a whirlwind that cleaved through the first line of defenders, his roar a challenge to the traitor he had long marked as his own. Yakid, he bellowed into the fray, your betrayal ends where my sword begins. The fighting turned savage, a whirlwind of blood and shadow. Tarhin intercepted an arrow meant for Orhan Sahib with the flat of his shield, then spun to dispatch two foes in a single fluid motion, his sword singing through the smoke that now rose from overturned supply wagons set ablaze by Mustafa's quick hands. The fire turns the tide, Orhan Sahib shouted, his voice cutting through the din like a call to prayer amid the storm. Flames licked upward, devouring dry brush and illuminating the chaos in hellish orange, smoke choking the air and blinding Shahanshah's men while Orhan's forces struck from the gloom. Damir Khan held the left with unyielding fury, his axe rising and falling as he drove back a desperate counterpush. They break, he roared, and Abdul Rahman's rear guard closed the trap, preventing any retreat. Altuddin Sahib directed the flow from a slight rise, his command steady. Qulads, plant the standard there, let them see the banner of justice unfurled. Hilal's axes thundered against shields, splintering them, while Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib coordinated the psychological blow. Captured messengers forced to their knees and made to shout Shahanshah's lies back at their own lines, sowing doubt like poison in the veins of loyalty. Yet amid the inferno and the clash of arms, the true heart of the night revealed itself. Yakid, cornered by the encroaching flames and the tightening noose of Orhan's encirclement, broke free of his faltering guards and charged straight toward Orhan Faladios. The two met in a clearing ringed by burning undergrowth, smoke swirling like the breath of judgment itself. You were once my brother in arms, Faladios snarled, his voice raw with the pain of betrayal, yet you sold your soul to that manipulative dog Shahanshah for a handful of gold and empty promises. Yakid laughed bitterly, his blade already slick with the blood of the fallen, his eyes wild with the desperation of a man who knew his fate approached. Authority is a lie, Faladios. Orhan Sahib's justice is but a mask for his own hunger. Shahanshah offers power, real power. Their duel erupted then, a storm of steel and oaths that drew every eye even as the greater battle raged around them. Faladios struck first, a high arc that Yakid parried with a grunt, the clash ringing like a bell tolling doom. Sparks flew as blades scraped, the two circling in the firelight, sweat and blood streaking their faces. Yakid lunged low, aiming for the knee, but Faladios leaped aside, his counter slicing across Yakid's shoulder and drawing a howl of pain. Feel the weight of your treachery. Faladios pressed, his blows relentless, each one a sermon on honor lost. Yakid countered with a desperate flurry, his sword biting into Faladios' shield, splintering wood and drawing a thin line of red across the commander's arm. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the flames paused in their hunger as the rivals fought, their breaths ragged, their words laced with the fire of old rivalries. You will die here, traitor, Faladios vowed, and your name will be cursed upon the lips of every loyal soul. Yakid spat blood and charged again, but Faladios was faster, his blade finding the gap in the armor at the traitor's side. Steel sank deep and Yakid staggered, his eyes widening in the realization of fate's final turn. He fell to one knee amid the smoke and ash, gasping, the war, it devours us all. Faladios stood over him, blade raised, yet he did not strike the killing blow, not yet. Instead, he dragged the wounded traitor forward, presenting him to Orhan Sahib as the fires raged on. Orhan Sahib approached through the haze, his presence commanding silence even in the heart of battle. The chaos around them began to ebb as Shahanshah's forces, seeing their supply lines aflame and their champion fallen, wavered. Tarhan and the captains closed ranks, Daimir Khan and Mahmud securing the perimeter while Abdul Rahman and Tamir Boga rounded up the surrendered. Yaqid, Orhan Sahib said, his voice heavy with the sorrow of justice served. You swore oaths upon the holy book and broke them for the whispers of a desperate ruler. Look upon the consequences of your betrayal. Shahanshah's manipulation ends where true authority begins. Yaqid, bloodied and bound now by Mustafa's strong hands, lifted his head with the last dregs of defiance. You speak of justice, Orhan Sahib, but the world turns on power alone. Shahanshah will crush you yet. A moral confrontation unfolded there in the glowing ruins of the ambush, the captains bearing witness as Orhan Sahib spoke of fate and the Almighty's unerring scale. Betrayal is the poison that festers in the soul of empires, he declared, and loyalty is the shield that turns every arrow. You chose the shadow, Yaqid. Now the shadow claims you. Yet mercy tempered the edge. Orhan Sahib spared the traitor's life for now, binding him for the march ahead, a living symbol of consequences that would break the will of any who still clung to Shahanshah's crumbling cause. The strategic aftermath settled like the smoke upon the forest floor. Altadin Sahib surveyed the captured wagons, his calculations swift, enough powder and grain to sustain Orhan's host for weeks, enough to turn the tide of the greater war. Zarkin and Kulud scouted the retreating enemy trails, confirming the encirclement had shattered Shahanshah's advance guard. Hilal and Al-Aliaddin Sahib tended the wounded with grim efficiency, while Jarkata Sahib interrogated the prisoners, extracting whispers of Shahanshah's desperation, his court fracturing, his manipulative decrees now ringing hollow. We press the advantage, Orhan Sahib commanded, his voice rising above the crackle of dying fires. The siege of his frontier fortress awaits. Cut off from supplies, his walls will hunger before our rams strike. Psychological warfare continues. Let the captured banners fly inverted as we march, a warning to every soul within his reach. Tarhan nodded, wiping blood from his blade, his eyes already scanning the path forward. Orhan Faladios, breathing still heavy from the duel, clasped Orhan Sahib's shoulder. The rival is broken, my lord. Justice has spoken through steel. The night, though it had given way to the first pale fingers of dawn filtering through the smoke-choked trees, felt eternal in its lessons. Yet as the host reformed and began its march out of the forest's embrace, horses now laden with spoils, captains riding tall beneath the unfurled standard, the war revealed it was far from over. A lone rider, bloodied and half-dead, burst from the southern thickets, collapsing at Orhan Sahib's feet. My lord, the messenger gasped, clutching a sealed scroll marked with Shahanshah's desperate seal. Another betrayal stirs within our own ranks, a shadow in the halls we thought secure. Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed, the weight of authority pressing heavier than any blade. Tarhan and Faladios exchanged glances, the captains tightening their formation instinctively. The forest fell silent behind them as the column pressed onward toward the distant silhouette of the fortress, smoke still rising from the battlefield like a prayer unanswered. The night's work was done, but the greater darkness loomed ahead, fate's next turning where loyalty would be tested anew, and justice demanded its full measure. The march continued, relentless into the uncertain dawn, the echo of steel and oaths lingering long after the trees swallowed the last of the flames. As the column wound its way out of the blackened embrace of Karadog Forest, the first pale light of dawn struggled against the lingering smoke that clung to every banner and blade like the breath of the damned. Orhan Sahib rode at the head, his face a mask of unyielding resolve, yet beneath the surface his mind churned with the weight of the messenger's dying words. Another betrayal, a shadow within their own halls. The forest had given them victory, but victory, he knew, was merely the opening verse in a longer, bloodier poem written by fate itself. By the one who turns night into day and weakness into strength, he murmured, his voice carrying softly to Tarhan riding close at his right. We shall not rest until every thread of treachery is burned away in the fire of divine justice. Tarhan, his armor still streaked with the soot and blood of the night's work, nodded once, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. The men are weary, Orhan Sahib, but their hearts burn brighter than the wagons we left behind. They will follow you into the jaws of hell itself if you command it. Behind them, the host stretched long through the narrow mountain pass, Daimir Khan commanding the left flank with Mahmud's archers ever watchful, Abdul Rahman guarding the rear with iron discipline, Tamir Boga urging the horses forward with steady calls, Mustafa scouting the high ridges, Altadin Sahib calculating every grain of captured supply, Zarkin moving like a shadow among the rocks, Kulud's bearing the heavy standard high so every man could see the symbol of their cause. Hilal and his axemen forming the brutal heart of any coming charge, Al-Aliaddin Sahib tending the wounded with quiet prayers, and Jarkata Sahib questioning the bound prisoners in low, relentless tones. At the center, dragged on a spare mount with wrists bound in heavy rope, rode Yaqid, the traitor whose wound from Faladios's blade still wept slowly, a living reminder of consequences. Burhan Faladios, fierce Faladios, rode a few paces behind, his eyes never leaving the man who had once been his rival and now stood as proof that betrayal carried its own bitter harvest. The march continued through the morning, the air growing heavier as the sun climbed and the land opened into rolling hills scarred by old battles. Smoke from distant villages told tales of Shahanshah's desperation, his forces burning what they could not hold, poisoning wells and spreading fear among the common folk to turn them against Orhan's cause. Psychological warfare, Orhan Sahib said aloud to his captains during a brief halt beside a clear stream where horses drank greedily. Shahanshah seeks to break the spirit before the steel meets. He would make the people fear us more than him, but we bring justice, not terror. Let every village we pass see mercy to the innocent and swift judgment to the guilty. He ordered Alauddin Sahib to distribute a portion of the captured grain to the first hamlet they encountered, and Jarkata Sahib to proclaim loudly that Orhan Sahib fought not for thrones alone, but for the restoration of rightful order under the gaze of the Almighty. The effect was immediate. Fearful eyes softened, whispers of hope began to spread like ripples in still water. Yet the shadow of the new betrayal gnawed at every mind. That night, as the host camped in the shelter of a rocky outcrop, with watchfires burning low and sentries posted in triple strength, Orhan Sahib called his inner circle together beneath a canopy of stars that seemed colder than usual. Yaqid was brought forward, still bound, his face pale from loss of blood but his tongue still sharp with defiance. "You think you have won the night, Orhan Sahib," the traitor rasped, his voice hoarse yet venomous. Shahanshah has eyes and ears everywhere, even among those you call loyal. One of your own captains already wavers. The walls you trust will crumble from within before your siege begins. Faladio stepped forward, hand on his sword, but Orhan Sahib raised a hand to stay him. "Speak the name," Orhan commanded, his tone low and dangerous like distant thunder rolling across the hills. Yaqid laughed weakly, coughing blood. "Names are currency. Give me my life and perhaps I will buy yours with it." The moral confrontation hung heavy in the firelight. Orhan Sahib leaned closer, his eyes burning with the fire of authority and faith. "You speak of life as if it were yours to bargain. Your fate is already written, a warning to every soul tempted by false power. But know this, the Almighty sees every hidden dagger, every whispered lie. Betrayal does not hide forever." Yaqid fell silent then, his gaze shifting uneasily, for in Orhan's words he felt the unyielding weight of justice closing around him like chains forged in heaven itself. Following dawn brought movement once more. The column pressed toward the frontier fortress of Karamir, a massive stone bastion perched on a steep escarpment, its walls said to have never fallen in open assault. Shahanshah's banners still flew from its towers, but intelligence gathered by Zarkin and Jarkata Sahib painted a picture of growing desperation inside. Supplies running low, morale fracturing, and rumors that the manipulative ruler had promised lavish rewards to any who could deliver Orhan's head. "We do not storm the walls blindly," Orhan Sahib declared to his captains as they surveyed the distant silhouette from a hidden ridge. "We encircle. We cut every road, every stream, every secret path, starve the fortress of hope itself. Let fear do half the work before our rams touch stone." Strategic thinking flowed from him like a river carving stone. Damir Khan and Mahmud were sent with a strong force to seize the northern supply road, burning bridges behind them. Abdulrahman and Tamir Boga moved to the southern passes to block retreat. Mustafa and a band of swift riders harassed any scouts attempting to slip out. Alauddin Sahib oversaw the construction of siege lines, while Kilil's axemen and Kuleds prepared the heavy engines that would soon batter the gates. As the siege tightened its noose over the following days, the atmosphere grew darker, grittier. Nights became long vigils filled with the distant cries of sentries and the occasional arrow whistling from the walls. Smoke from cooking fires mixed with the acrid scent of pitch being boiled atop the battlements. Orhan Sahib walked among his men each evening, offering prayers and words of honor. "Remember why we stand here," he would say, his voice carrying across the camp. "Not for gold or land alone, but because authority without justice is tyranny and justice without strength is a dream. Shahanshah has chosen the path of manipulation and betrayal. We choose the path of truth even when it is paved with blood." Orhan remained ever at his side, intercepting threats both seen and unseen, his loyalty a silent anchor in the growing tension. Then came the night when the true chaos of siege warfare erupted. Shahanshah, growing ever more desperate inside the fortress, ordered a sudden sally, a desperate breakout attempt under cover of darkness and smoke. Torches were thrown from the walls to ignite the dry grass in front of Orhan's lines, creating a wall of fire and confusion. "They come," shouted Mustafa from the forward pickets as hundreds of armored men poured from a hidden sally port, screaming war cries laced with fear and false courage. The fighting turned savage in an instant. Close quarters chaos swallowed the night, steel clashing, men shouting oaths to the Almighty, horses screaming as they were cut down. Orhan charged into the melee, his blade a streak of death, intercepting arrows and cutting down the lead attackers with precise, lethal grace. "Hold the line for Orhan Sahib," he roared, his voice rising above the roar of flames. Damir Khan and Kilil met the brunt of the assault head-on, their axes and swords carving bloody paths through the desperate enemy. Mahmud's archers loosed volleys into the smoke, while Abdul Rahman and Tamir Boga swung around to strike the sally force from the flank. In the heart of that inferno, Burhan Faladios once again found himself face to face with treachery made flesh. A group of turncoats, men who had secretly pledged themselves to Shahanshah, broke through the lines and charged straight toward Orhan Sahib's command position. At their head rode a figure cloaked in dark armor, his face hidden until the moment he raised his visor in challenge. It was one of their own captains, a man once trusted, now revealed as the shadow Yaqid had hinted at. Faladios met him with a thunderous clash, the two warriors colliding in a personal duel that seemed to slow time itself amid the surrounding madness. "You dare turn your blade against the man who gave you honor," Faladios bellowed, his sword meeting the traitor with sparks that lit the smoke like lightning. The duel was brutal, personal, a whirlwind of ringing steel and heavy breaths. The traitor fought with the frenzy of a cornered animal, shouting, "Shahanshah promised me command, real power. Orhan's justice is weakness," Faladios answered with unrelenting fury, each strike a declaration of loyalty and justice. "Weakness is selling your soul for empty promises." Their blades locked, faces inches apart, sweat and blood mingling in the firelight. With a final, powerful twist, Faladios forced the traitor's sword aside and drove his own deep into the man's chest. The betrayer fell to his knees, eyes wide with shock and regret, gasping his last words, "Fate laughs at us all." The sally was broken. Shahanshah's desperate gamble ended in smoke and slaughter, his forces retreating behind the walls with heavy losses. Yet the victory came at a cost. Several good men lay fallen, and the psychological toll of internal betrayal weighed heavily on every heart. Orhan Sahib stood among the dead and wounded as the fires slowly died, offering prayers for the souls of the loyal and pronouncing judgment on the traitors. Yaqid, watching from his bonds, seemed smaller now, the fire of defiance dimming as he witnessed the consequences unfolding in real time. "You see," Orhan Sahib said to him quietly, yet loud enough for nearby captains to hear, "every betrayal plants the seeds of its own destruction. Honor is the only foundation that does not crumble." Yaqid lowered his head, silent for the first time. As the siege settled into its grinding rhythm once more, supply lines completely severed, the fortress beginning to feel the bite of hunger, Orhan Sahib gathered his captains for counsel. Strategic plans deepened. Altadin Sahib proposed diverting a nearby stream to flood the lower approaches, weakening the foundations. Jarkata Sahib suggested spreading rumors among the prisoners to be released near the walls, telling tales of Shahanshah's growing madness and offers of pardon to any who opened the gates. Psychological warfare continued without mercy. Zarkin and Mustafa slipped through the night to sabotage the enemy's remaining water sources. Hulads planted the standard closer each day, a constant reminder of the tightening noose. The atmosphere grew heavier, darker nights filled with the distant groans of starving men on the walls, the crackle of watchfires, and the low chanting of prayers from Orhan's camp invoking divine aid. Yet even as momentum built toward the final assault, a new message arrived under flag of truce, a lone rider from inside the fortress bearing Shahanshah's seal. The manipulative ruler, increasingly desperate, offered terms, safe passage for Orhan's host if they lifted the siege, along with promises of alliance and shared authority. The captains listened in silence as the envoy read the words aloud. Orhan Sahib's response was calm, yet laced with the steel of unshakable conviction. "Tell your master that authority stolen through betrayal and manipulation holds no value in the eyes of the Almighty. We do not bargain with those who poison the well of justice. The fortress will fall not by our hands alone but by the weight of fate itself. Surrender now and mercy may still find a place. Resist and the consequences will echo through generations." The envoy departed pale-faced, the weight of those words hanging in the air like smoke after battle. That night, as the camp prepared for what might be the decisive push, Turhan approached Orhan Sahib beneath the shadowed walls. "My lord, the men are ready. Faladios burns for the final charge, but the shadow of betrayal still lingers. We must remain vigilant." Orhan Sahib placed a hand on his right hand's shoulder, his voice steady with the rhythm of destiny. "We have come through forest and fire, ambush and duel, loyalty tested and justice served. The war is not over. Shahanshah's desperation will birth new treacheries, new shadows. But we march forward, guided by honor and the unerring hand of the Most High." In the distance, the fortress loomed like a wounded giant, its torches flickering uncertainly against the night sky. Somewhere within its walls, Shahanshah paced in growing fear, while outside Orhan Sahib's host stood ready, a force forged in darkness, tempered by betrayal and driven by the eternal call of justice. The drums began to beat low and steady, signaling the final preparations. Smoke from the enemy's dwindling fires drifted across the lines like ghosts of fallen empires. The night deepened once more, pregnant with the promise of steel, prayer, and the next inevitable turning of fate. Whatever betrayal awaited within or without, the march of justice would not be halted. The siege pressed on, relentless into the uncertain heart of the coming dawn, and beyond it the greater war still loomed, its next chapter written in blood, honor, and the unyielding will of those who refused to bow to shadows. The low, rhythmic beat of the war drums rolled across the darkened hills like the heartbeat of an awakening giant, echoing off the cold stone walls of Karamir Fortress and stirring the blood of every man who stood beneath Orhan Sahib's banner. The night had deepened once again into that sacred, dangerous hour when the veil between courage and fear grew thin, when souls turned inward to measure their oaths against the vast silence of the Almighty. Orhan Saheb stood upon a low rise overlooking the siege lines, his cloak stirring faintly in the chill wind that carried the scent of smoke, pitch, and distant desperation. Behind him, the host waited, thousands of shadows armed with steel and faith, their faces illuminated only by the flickering watchfires and the pale glow of the moon struggling through gathering clouds. In the name of the most compassionate, whose justice never sleeps and whose mercy is reserved for the righteous, Orhan Saheb intoned, his voice carrying far on the night air, we stand not as conquerors driven by greed, but as instruments of balance restored. Shahanshah has built his throne upon betrayal and manipulation. Tonight, that throne begins to crack. Orhan remained at his right hand, ever vigilant, his sharp eyes scanning the darkened battlements where enemy torches burned low and uncertain. The scouts report movement inside Orhan Saheb, he said quietly, his tone edged with the calm of a man who had intercepted death many times before. They prepare another sally, or perhaps they ready their final defense. The hunger gnaws at them now, we have cut every supply, poisoned their hope. Orhan Faladios, fierce and unyielding Faladios, sat mounted nearby, his hand resting on the hilt of the same blade that had felled Yakid and the traitor captain in the smoke of battle. His rivalry-born hatred for weakness burned brighter than any siege fire. Let them come, he growled. My sword thirsts for the next betrayer who dares show his face. The other captains held their positions with disciplined precision. Damir Khan and Mahmud anchoring the northern approaches with archers ready to darken the sky. Abdulrahman and Tamir Boga sealing the southern escarpment. Mustafa and his swift riders patrolling the ridges like wolves. Altuddin Saheb directing the siege engines with mathematical calm. Zarkin slipping through the shadows to map every weakness in the walls. Kulid's holding the great standard high so it caught what little moonlight remained. Kilil and his axemen forming the iron fist of the coming assault. Al-Aliuddin Saheb ensuring the wounded were tended and the supplies guarded, and Jarkata Saheb weaving psychological threads among the prisoners, planting seeds of doubt that would sprout behind the enemy's own gates. The first crack of thunder rolled across the sky as if the heavens themselves answered Orhan Saheb's invocation. Then the assault began, not from the fortress, but from Orhan's own carefully laid plan. At his signal, the siege engines groaned to life. Massive stones hurled through the night air, crashing against the ancient walls with bone-shaking force. Smoke bombs prepared by Al-Aliuddin Saheb from captured pitch and herbs were launched to billow thick, choking clouds over the battlements, blinding the defenders and sowing panic. Forward, cried Tamir Boga, his voice rising like a call to prayer amid the chaos. The first wave of attackers surged toward the walls under cover of the smoke, ladders raised, grappling hooks thrown, shields locked overhead as arrows rained down from above. The fighting erupted in savage, close-quarters fury along the base of the fortress. Men screamed oaths to the Almighty as steel met steel on narrow ledges and slippery slopes. Orhan led a daring charge up the main approach, his blade flashing as he intercepted arrows meant for his brothers, cutting down defenders who leaned too far over the parapets. For honor and for Orhan Saheb, he shouted, his words cutting through the roar of battle like a blade through silk. Deep within the smoke and fire, Orhan Faladios found his moment once more. A section of the wall buckled under the relentless pounding of the siege engines, and a desperate group of Shahanshah's elite guards poured through the breach in a frantic counterattack. At their head rode a figure whose armor bore the personal markings of the manipulative ruler himself, a commander sent to break the siege or die trying. Faladios met him in the heart of the breach, where fire from burning pitch lit the scene in hellish, flickering orange. The two warriors clashed with terrifying force, their duel a whirlwind of ringing steel and raw power amid the collapsing stone and choking smoke. You serve a master who trades loyalty for gold. Faladios roared, his blade striking sparks off the enemy's shield. The commander answered with equal fury, his voice strained by hunger and desperation. Shahanshah is the future. Your Orhan Saheb clings to outdated honor while the world changes. Their blades locked, faces inches apart, eyes burning with the fire of opposing fates. Faladios twisted free and delivered a powerful overhead strike that shattered the man's shield and drove him back against the crumbling wall. Smoke swirled around them like the breath of judgment as Faladios pressed the advantage, each blow a sermon on the consequences of serving betrayal. The enemy commander fought valiantly, landing a glancing cut across Faladios' thigh, but it was not enough. With a final, thunderous cry invoking the name of the Almighty, Faladios drove his sword through the gap in the armor, ending the duel in a spray of blood that mingled with the ash and dust. The defender fell, and with him the heart of that counterattack crumbled. Outside the walls, the greater battle raged on. Damir Khan and Kilil led a brutal push on the northern gate, their axes cleaving through defenders who had grown weak from starvation. Mahmud's arrows found every gap in the smoke, felling officers and sowing chaos among the ranks. Abdulrahman held the rear with unyielding resolve, preventing any breakout, while Mustafa's riders struck from the flanks like lightning, harassing and confusing the enemy lines. Altuddin Saheb's calculations proved true. The diverted stream now flooded the lower approaches, turning the ground into a treacherous mire that slowed reinforcements and weakened the foundations of the outer curtain wall. Zarkin and Jarkata Saheb had done their silent work well. Captured prisoners released earlier had carried tales of Orhan Sahib's mercy and Shahanshah's growing madness into the fortress, causing desertions and whispered arguments among the defenders. As the night wore on and the smoke thickened into an almost impenetrable veil, Orhan Sahib himself rode forward into the fray, his presence igniting new courage in his men. "Justice does not wait behind lines," he called out, his voice rising above the din. "It rides with us," the men answered with a roar that shook the very stones. Yaqid, still bound and guarded closely by Al-Aliaddin Sahib's men, watched from the rear lines, his face a mask of conflicted torment. The traitor who had once mocked Orhan's cause now saw the weight of loyalty and honor in action, a force that betrayal could not easily break. In a rare moment of broken pride, Yaqid muttered to his guard, "He fights as if the Almighty rides beside him. Perhaps I chose the wrong shadow after all." The turning point came when a section of the main gate finally gave way under the combined assault of fire, stone, and relentless pressure. Flames erupted from within as defenders tried to burn the breach, but the smoke only added to the confusion. Orhan was the first through the shattered gateway, his sword clearing a path as he shouted, "The gate is ours, push forward for honor." Valadios followed close behind, his wound bandaged roughly yet his spirit unbroken, leading a wedge of axemen and swordsmen into the courtyard beyond. Hand-to-hand combat filled the narrow streets and open squares of the fortress interior, chaotic, gritty, filled with the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the crackle of spreading fires. Hewlett's planted the great standard atop a captured tower, its fabric snapping in the wind like a declaration of victory unfolding. Kilil's axes thundered against doors and shields alike, while Damir Khan and Mahmud secured key positions, preventing organized resistance from reforming. Inside the keep, Shahanshah, the once manipulative ruler whose schemes had brought him to this desperate hour, paced in growing panic. His remaining loyalists urged him to flee through a secret passage, but pride and fear warred within him. "I will not run from a man who claims justice while he batters my walls," he snarled to his advisors, yet his voice trembled with the knowledge that his web of betrayals was unraveling. He ordered one final, suicidal countercharge, sending what remained of his personal guard into the chaos, hopping to strike Orhan Sahib directly and turn the tide through a single, bold act of desperation. That final confrontation unfolded in the smoke-filled great hall of the fortress, where flickering torches cast long, dancing shadows on ancient tapestries stained with centuries of history. Orhan Sahib entered with Orhan and a small guard of captains, his sword drawn, his face illuminated by the fires that now consumed parts of the structure. Shahanshah met him there, surrounded by his last faithful, including a few who still clung to the promises of power he had whispered in darker days. "You have come far, Orhan Sahib," Shahanshah said, his voice attempting the old manipulative tone but cracking under strain. "Yet authority is not won by siege alone. Join me and we can rule together, stronger than before." Orhan Sahib's response was measured, heavy with the moral weight of justice and fate. "You speak of rule while your hands drip with the blood of betrayed oaths. You manipulated loyalty, poisoned wells of trust, and turned brothers against brothers. The Almighty does not bless such foundations. Surrender now and your life may be spared for judgment. Resist and your name will become a cautionary tale whispered in the winds of history." The words ignited the final clash. Shahanshah's guards charged and the hall erupted into savage combat. Orhan moved like lightning, intercepting blows and protecting his commander with selfless skill. Valadios engaged multiple foes at once, his blade a storm of righteous fury. In the center of it all, Orhan Sahib dueled Shahanshah himself, not with wild rage, but with the calm, unyielding precision of a man who fought for something greater than personal glory. Their blades met again and again, the ring of steel echoing like judgment bells. "Your justice is a lie," Shahanshah hissed between strikes, his movements growing desperate. "Power is all that matters." Orhan Sahib parried and countered, his voice steady even in battle. "Power without honor is dust. Justice is the foundation that endures when thrones crumble." The duel stretched, intense and personal, until Shahanshah overextended in his desperation. Orhan Sahib's blade found its mark, not a killing blow, but one that disarmed the ruler and sent his sword clattering across the stone floor. The fortress fell that night. Fires raged in controlled sections while Orhan's men secured the rest, extinguishing what they could and tending to the wounded on both sides where mercy allowed. Shahanshah was taken alive, bound with the same ropes that had held Yaqid, his manipulative gaze now dimmed by defeat. Yaqid, witnessing the fall, lowered his head in silence, the full weight of consequences settling upon him like the smoke that still hung heavy in the air. The captains gathered: Damir Khan, Mahmud, Abdul Rahman, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilil, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib, their faces weary yet triumphant, their armor dented and bloodied, yet their spirits lifted by the justice served. Orhan Sahib stood atop the highest tower as the first light of dawn pierced the smoke, the great standard of his cause fluttering proudly above the conquered fortress. "We have taken Karamir," he declared to his host, his voice carrying the rhythm of hard-won victory, "but the war is not over. Shahanshah's allies still stir in the east. new shadows of betrayal may rise from the ashes. We must press onward, cutting supply lines, encircling strongholds, and reminding every soul that honor and justice are the only true authorities under heaven. The men answered with a unified cry that rolled across the hills like thunder. Yet as the host prepared to march once more, a lone rider approached from the eastern horizon, dust rising behind him like a warning. He bore urgent news, a new alliance forming against them, led by remnants of Shahansh's supporters and whispers of yet another traitor within Orhan's expanding ranks. The messenger knelt, breathing hard. "My lord, the war shifts again. A greater storm gathers beyond these walls." Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his sword as he gazed toward the distant horizon where dark clouds gathered. Tarhan and Faladios exchanged glances, the captains tightening their formation instinctively. The night's victory had been decisive, the fires of Karamir still smoldering behind them, but the greater darkness loomed ahead, new betrayals, new sieges, new tests of loyalty and fate. The column began its march eastward, banners high, steel-ready, prayers on every lip. Smoke from the fallen fortress trailed after them like a memory, while the road ahead twisted into unknown shadows. Justice had claimed one stronghold, but the epic struggle continued, relentless, unyielding, written in blood, honor, and the eternal turning of destiny's wheel. The war pressed forward, and with it marched Orhan Sahib and his loyal host, into whatever fire and treachery the coming nights would bring. The column of Orhan Sahib moved eastward like a river of steel and faith cutting through the scarred hills, the banners of justice snapping in the morning wind that still carried the acrid scent of smoke from the fallen fortress of Karamir. Dawn had broken fully now, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold, yet the shadows of the night's victory lingered in every heart. Behind them the great stone bastion smoldered, its walls breached, its gates shattered, its manipulative master bound and marching in chains among the captured. Shahanshah rode in silence, his one-sprout head bowed, the weight of defeat pressing heavier than any armor. Yaqid, the traitor whose fate had become a living sermon, rode nearby, his eyes hollow with the realization that every betrayal plants the seeds of its own bitter harvest. Orhan Sahib rode at the fore, his posture straight as the blade at his side, yet his gaze scanned the distant horizon where dark clouds gathered like unspoken warnings from the Almighty. By the name of the eternal judge who sees every hidden dagger and every whispered lie, he spoke aloud, his voice carrying back through the ranks. "We have claimed one stronghold for justice, but the greater war calls us onward. Honor demands we do not grow complacent. Fate tests the steadfast." Tarhan, ever the elite swordsman and right hand of command, rode close at his side, his armor still dented from the night's furious duels, his eyes sharp as the edge of his blade. The men celebrate the fall of Karamir Orhan Sahib, yet the messenger's words weigh heavy. A new alliance stirs in the east, remnants of Shahanshah's supporters gathering under a different banner, whispering of fresh betrayals even within our growing host. Orhan Faladios, fierce Faladios, whose blade had ended the life of one traitor and disarmed the heart of another, rode just behind, his wounded thigh bandaged but his spirit undimmed. "Let them come," he growled, his voice low and resonant with the fire of righteous rivalry. "My sword has tasted the blood of betrayal twice already. It will drink again if any man among us dares waver." The captains maintained their disciplined formation as the march continued. Damir Khan and Mahmud guarding the northern flank with vigilant archers, Abdulrahman and Tamir Boga securing the rear, Mustafa and his swift riders reining ahead to scout the twisting paths, Altuddin Sahib calculating supplies and siege preparations for the road ahead, Zarkin moving like a ghost through the underbrush to uncover hidden dangers, Kilid's bearing the great standard high so every soul could draw strength from its sight, Kilil and his axemen forming the brutal core of any coming charge. Al-Aliuddin Sahib tending the wounded with quiet prayers and efficient hands, and Jarkata Sahib weaving through the ranks and among the prisoners, listening for any whisper that might signal new treachery. As the sun climbed higher and the land opened into wide, rolling plains dotted with ancient ruins and sparse forests, the strategic mind of Orhan Sahib turned once more to encirclement and severance. "We cannot allow the enemy remnants to consolidate," he declared during a brief halt beside a clear stream where horses drank and men refilled their waterskins. "Their new alliance feeds on fear and false promises of power. We cut their supply lines before they strengthen. We starve their hope before our steel reaches them. Psychological warfare must ride ahead of our banners. Let released captives carry tales of Karamir's fall, of Shahanshah's chains, and of the mercy granted to those who choose honor over manipulation." Altuddin Sahib nodded, already adjusting calculations for divided forces and captured resources. Jarkata Sahib selected a handful of prisoners to be given horses, and sent eastward with carefully crafted messages of justice and warning. The plan was set in motion, with the precision of a blade being honed on stone. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of relentless movement and watchful vigilance. Nights grew longer and darker as storm clouds gathered overhead, turning the plains into a vast, shadowed expanse where the wind whispered of coming trials. Campfires burned low, casting flickering light on faces etched with fatigue and determination. Orhan Sahib walked among his men each evening, offering invocations and words of strength. "Remember, my brothers," he would say, his voice steady as the turning of seasons, "loyalty is the shield that turns every arrow of betrayal. Justice is the fire that consumes the weeds of manipulation. We do not march for personal glory, but for the restoration of rightful order under the gaze of the Most High." The men listened, their oaths renewed in the firelight, yet the shadow of the new threat loomed, rumors of a rival commander rising in the east, a figure said to be gathering forces with promises of wealth and revenge for Shahanshah's defeat. Then on the fifth night of the march, the forest returned, not the dense, ancient Karadog, but a thinner, more treacherous woodland known as the Whispering Groves, where narrow paths twisted between gnarled trees and hidden ravines. Orhan Sahib ordered the column to enter under cover of deepening darkness, using the trees as both shield and potential trap. "We move silently," he commanded. "The enemy may attempt an ambush here, where visibility dies and chaos reigns." Tarhan and Faladios led the vanguard, their senses heightened by years of war. Mustafa's scouts slipped ahead like shadows, while Zarkin mapped every possible ambush point. The night deepened, the canopy swallowing the faint moonlight, leaving only the soft crunch of boots on leaf litter and the distant hoot of owls that seemed to mock human struggles. The ambush came without warning, as fate so often does. A sudden rain of arrows erupted from the trees, followed by the thunder of charging horsemen bursting from the undergrowth. "For Shahanshah's vengeance!" screamed the attackers, their voices laced with desperation and false courage. Chaos erupted in the close-quarters hell of the forest once more, branches whipping at faces, roots claiming the unwary, steel clashing in the gloom. Smoke from hastily lit torches mixed with the sudden downpour, creating a gritty, blinding haze. Tarhan intercepted a volley of arrows meant for Orhan Sahib, his shield ringing with impacts as he spun to cut down the first rider who broke through. "Hold the center," he roared, his blade singing through the night. Faladios charged into the fray like a storm unleashed, his sword cleaving through the enemy line with relentless fury. "Betrayers and cowards," he bellowed. "Your new alliance ends here." The fighting turned savage and intimate. Damir Khan and Killil met a heavy push on the left flank, their axes rising and falling in bloody rhythm. Mahmud's archers loosed what arrows they could in the confined space, while Abdulrahman and Tamir Boga swung the rear guard around to trap the attackers from behind. Mustafa's riders countered the enemy horse, clashing in chaotic melees among the trees. Altadin Sahib directed from a slight rise, his commands calm amid the storm. Qulads planted the standard in a clearing, a beacon of defiance amid the smoke and rain. Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib worked to secure the prisoners, including Shahanshah, ensuring no opportunistic escape occurred in the confusion. In the heart of the maelstrom, another personal duel unfolded, this time between Faladios and a fierce enemy captain who claimed to be the new rising rival's right hand. The two met in a small clearing ringed by burning brush that the rain struggled to extinguish. Fire and smoke swirled as their blades clashed with thunderous force. "You fight for a fallen master," the enemy captain shouted, his voice raw. "The East offers real power now." Faladios answered with a powerful overhead strike that forced the man back. "Power bought with betrayal is cursed." Their duel raged, steel sparking in the firelight, breaths coming in ragged gasps as they circled and struck. The enemy landed a cut across Faladios' arm, drawing fresh blood, but Faladios pressed on, his blows growing heavier with the weight of honor and justice. With a final devastating combination, Faladios disarmed his opponent and brought him to his knees. "Tell your new master that justice rides faster than any alliance of shadows," he said, sparing the man's life as a messenger of warning rather than ending it outright. The ambush was broken. The surviving attackers fled deeper into the groves or surrendered, their morale shattered by the ferocity of Orhan's host. As the rain eased and the smoke began to thin, Orhan Sahib gathered his captains in the aftermath, the forest floor littered with the fallen and the dying fires casting long shadows. Yaqid, witnessing yet another failed attempt fueled by betrayal, spoke for the first time in days, his voice broken. "The new alliance, it will fracture as I did. Shahanshah's manipulation spreads like poison, but your cause, it endures." Orhan Sahib regarded him with the calm of moral confrontation. "Every traitor believes his path is clever until fate reveals the truth. Loyalty to justice is the only path that does not end in chains." Strategic thinking deepened in the quiet hours that followed. Altadin Sahib assessed the captured weapons and horses, bolstering their supplies for the push eastward. Jarkata Sahib interrogated the new prisoners, extracting whispers of the rival commander's location, a fortified camp near the river crossing of Vardek, where forces gathered under the banner of revenge. "We encircle them before they grow stronger," Orhan Sahib decided. "Cut their river supplies, harass their scouts, and let fear spread through their ranks like wildfire. The psychological blow of Karamir's fall will do half our work." Plans were set: Mustafa and Zarkin to lead scouting parties, Damir Khan and Mahmud to seize high ground, Abdul Rahman to guard the main column, Tamir Boga and Killil to prepare for the coming charge. As the host emerged from the Whispering Groves and continued its eastward march, the atmosphere grew heavier with the promise of greater conflict. Storm clouds darkened the sky once more, and distant fires on the horizon spoke of villages caught between loyalties. Orhan Sahib rode with renewed purpose, invoking the Almighty's guidance with every step. "The war is not over," he reminded his captains as night fell again. "New betrayals may rise, new sieges await, but we march under the banner of honor and justice. Fate turns, but the steadfast remain." Yet as the column crested a final ridge before the river plains, a new messenger arrived, bloodied and exhausted, bearing urgent tidings. "My lord, the rival commander has learned of Karamir's fall. He prepares a massive countermarch, and whispers speak of yet another shadow within our ranks, a captain whose loyalty wavers under secret promises." The news hung heavy in the air like smoke after battle. Tarhan's hand tightened on his sword. Faladios's eyes burned with anticipation. Shahanshah, listening from his bonds, allowed a faint, desperate smile to touch his lips before it faded under Orhan's steady gaze. The march continued into the gathering storm, the great standard fluttering defiantly against the wind. Fires of distant camps dotted the horizon like eyes watching in the dark. The night deepened once more, pregnant with the next chapter of steel, prayer, and inevitable confrontation. Whatever new betrayal or alliance awaited beyond the river, Orhan Sahib and his loyal host pressed forward, unyielding, righteous, and bound by the eternal call of justice that no shadow could extinguish. The epic struggle rolled on, its next turning written in blood, honor, and the unbreaking will of those who refused to bow. End of this segment. The march eastward continues, the new rival threat builds, and the shadow of internal betrayal deepens. The chamber breathes around them, not with air but with tension, every shadow stretching longer as Orhan Bey steps forward deliberately, his eyes never leaving the man before him, each Arabic het, Arabic rot, Arabic kaf, Arabic tetmerbuta measured and full of quiet authority, and behind him the Alps follow perfectly, aware that one wrong step could turn the delicate balance into chaos, but trusting completely that their Bey knows exactly when and how the next action must unfold. The man before Orhan watches him closely, his posture relaxed but alert, every Chinese letter movement calibrated, signaling nothing overtly but communicating volumes through subtle presence, and Orhan reads it with the same precision, understanding that this encounter is not won by speed or strength, but by awareness, anticipation, and the mastery of timing, because the chamber itself responds not to force but to control. A faint rumble echoes beneath their feet, low and rolling, almost imperceptible, yet enough to remind everyone present that this is not ordinary stone, that this space was engineered to test mind as much as body. And Orhan adjusts subtly, aligning his stance, feeling the rhythm of the chamber through the soles of his boots, matching it, moving with it, becoming part of its pulse without losing command over himself or his men. The figures at the edges of the chamber shift minutely, just enough to suggest readiness, their hands resting lightly on weapons, but not fully drawn, waiting for the signal that will not come until Orhan decides the moment is right, and the man across from him tilts his head, acknowledging the composure, nodding that Orhan's calm is not passivity but a deliberate, unshakable presence, one that has learned to read the design of the trap as if it were written in plain sight. Orhan speaks finally, his voice steady, echoing softly through the stone, cutting the silence without breaking it. "Every detail here exists because someone decided it should. Every shadow, every line, every movement is intentional, and I am no longer reacting. I am choosing, defining the next step on my own terms." And the man watches him with narrowed eyes, aware now that the chessboard has shifted, that Orhan is no longer a piece moved by circumstance, but a player capable of rewriting the board entirely. Another vibration rolls through the chamber, louder this time, and the walls hum faintly, responding not to action but to presence, as if the very stone recognizes that Orhan has begun to impose his will upon the space, and a faint glow emerges along the etched symbols on the walls, tracing lines that were previously invisible, revealing hidden paths, subtle traps, and strategic alignments that had been invisible until now, and Orhan's mind catalogs each one. Every insight sharpening his understanding of the labyrinth around him. A figure steps slightly forward from the shadows, testing the distance, and the Alps instinctively tighten their formation, but Orhan lifts a hand to stop them, signaling that observation and patience are stronger than immediate response, and the man across from him inclines slightly, acknowledging that Orhan is not merely reacting to his environment, but controlling how he interacts with it, bending perception and action together in a single, deliberate rhythm that the chamber itself seems to recognize. Orhan moves again, slow, precise, stepping into the center of the chamber, closing the distance between him and the man but never reckless, each Arabic ket, Arabic tot, Arabic wow, Arabic tetmerbut a message, each breath synchronized with the pulse of the space, and the figures at the edges shift minutely, leaning forward slightly, their attention absolute, as if the entire room is waiting for a single motion to break the suspended tension into something decisive. The man finally speaks, his voice quiet, measured, deliberate. "You understand the chamber now, yet understanding does not grant victory. Victory is choice, not insight. Will you act or continue observing?" And Orhan's eyes do not flicker, his stance remains unwavering as he replies, "Observation is preparation. Awareness is readiness. I act only when the moment demands it, and the moment is now approaching." A low, resonant hum vibrates through the floor, rising steadily, and the glow along the walls pulses with increasing intensity, revealing new pathways, new alignments, hidden compartments, and every symbol along the walls begins to shimmer subtly, casting distorted reflections onto the chamber's floor, as if the space itself acknowledges that Orhan has begun to master the rhythm of its design rather than merely navigate it. The Alps shift with him instinctively, forming tighter arcs, their eyes scanning the illuminated patterns, their minds processing faster than any spoken instruction, and Orhan's gaze sweeps across the chamber, calculating distances, anticipating movement, predicting responses, and in that moment he is no longer simply present. He is fully integrated into the structure, the chamber, and the unfolding sequence, commanding its tempo without a word, without a strike, without a gesture beyond his deliberate, controlled steps. From the far end, another figure steps forward, slightly taller than the last, moving with deliberate grace, and the man across from Orhan inclines subtly, signaling recognition that this is the final piece of the challenge, the true confrontation at the heart of the chamber. And Orhan's expression does not change because he has anticipated this, prepared for it, and now views the sequence as inevitable, each movement of the new figure simply a variable he already understands, catalogs, and controls mentally before it even occurs. The chamber responds again with a subtle vibration, the glowing patterns along the walls intensifying, and dust falls from the ceiling in fine motes, carried not by air but by the chamber's pulse itself, as if the space confirms the importance of every choice being made. And Orhan's Alps lean slightly forward, sensing that the next step will determine everything, the flow of battle, the meaning of this test, and the alignment of every remaining force within the space. Orhan raises his hand slowly, and the Alps freeze, trusting his timing absolutely, and he steps forward once deliberately to stand directly in the center of the chamber, narrowing the distance between himself, the first man, and the new figure emerging. And in that alignment, the tension becomes nearly tangible, stretching the space itself into a perfect balance where the next action will define not just survival but command of the entire environment. The first man inclines subtly, acknowledging Orhan's composure, and says, his voice low but steady, "You have learned to move within the chamber as it moves around you. Few can do this." Orhan replies simply, "Few survive observing without reaction, fewer control the flow without hesitation." Another low vibration rolls beneath their feet, and the glowing symbols shift once more, now forming subtle arrows, alignments, and pathways that only someone fully attentive could read. And Orhan's eyes move over them all, cataloging, integrating, predicting, understanding, because this is not a test of strength. It is a test of awareness, precision, patience, and timing, and he meets it with total control over his own mind, body, and formation. The chamber's vibrations pulse again, subtle at first, then growing stronger, almost as if the stone itself is testing Orhan Bey's awareness, responding only to those capable of perceiving its rhythm. And as he adjusts his stance slightly, synchronizing with the pulse, the Alps mirror him perfectly, each man poised and ready, their movements invisible yet perfectly coordinated, as if guided by thought rather than command. The second figure steps fully into the open now, his shadow stretching across the glowing patterns, yet he makes no move toward aggression, instead standing with deliberate calm, forcing Orhan to read every micro-gesture, every weight shift, every glance, and Orhan does so without hesitation. Absorbing the information like the chamber itself is feeding him the data needed to anticipate, counter, and ultimately control the sequence. A distant echo resonates from the far wall, carrying the sound of stone grinding slowly, and the glow along the etched symbols ripples in response, forming lines and arcs that were previously invisible, mapping invisible pathways through the space. And Orhan's eyes trace them carefully, integrating each new piece of information into his understanding of the chamber, nodding hazards, nodding opportunities, nodding how every element interacts with movement and intention. The first man shifts slightly, a subtle gesture meant to probe Orhan's reaction, and Orhan steps just half a pace forward, not rushed, not abrupt, but deliberate, precise, as if even the smallest movement carries calculated weight. And the Alps adjust automatically, forming arcs around him that both protect and position them strategically, creating layers of control within a space that was designed to confine and test them. Orhan's hand rests slightly near the hilt of his sword, but he does not draw, because this moment is not about violence. It is about observation, anticipation, and the silent assertion of control. And as he steps again, the chamber hums faintly beneath their feet, the patterns on the walls shifting slightly, revealing a new alignment, one that shows which pathways lead to dominance and which to entrapment, and Orhan notes each one without hesitation. A figure at the edge of the chamber moves slightly, testing the formation of Orhan's Alps, and though the movement is small, the response is immediate. The nearest men shift to cover the position while maintaining overall cohesion, signaling to the observer that the command is seamless, that discipline is absolute, and that Orhan's awareness is complete, flowing through every individual in the formation without the need for speech or signal. Second figure tilts his head subtly, recognizing this control, and says in a low, deliberate tone, "You have mastered your men, yet the chamber itself is not conquered by formation alone. Awareness must extend beyond position." And Orhan replies with quiet authority, "Formation is only the beginning. Awareness extends to space, shadow, and timing, integrating every element into movement, decision, and action. And when the moment arrives, each response will be exact, precise, and unstoppable." The chamber responds again, vibrations intensifying, and the glow along the walls forms a pattern that appears almost like a map, highlighting areas of vulnerability, exposure, and advantage, and Orhan studies it meticulously, tracing each path with his eyes, cataloging the interactions of light, shadow, distance, and timing, while his Alps shift imperceptibly, holding positions that now align perfectly with the unseen architecture of the test. The stone above shifts slightly, dislodged by the vibrations, and dust falls in thin lines that catch the glow, yet no one flinches. The motion is understood as part of the environment, part of the challenge, and Orhan's gaze sweeps quickly across the chamber to note its effect, integrating it instantly into his mental map, knowing that even small changes may reveal opportunities or signal danger. The first man steps forward now, closer than before, his shadow overlapping Orhan's space, testing not his body but his mind, and Orhan remains perfectly composed, his eyes fixed calmly on the figure, his posture unwavering, every micro-movement controlled, every subtle breath measured, communicating that he is ready, aware, and fully capable of managing both men and environment simultaneously, and the chamber itself seems to acknowledge this precision. Another vibration rolls through the stone beneath their feet, a faint hum growing into a low resonance, and the glow along the walls intensifies, revealing previously hidden pathways, each line marking a sequence, a choice, a potential consequence, and Orhan's mind catalogs each possibility with lightning clarity, predicting not only what could happen but what must be done, and where every response will be exact, leaving no room for chance or error. The second figure takes a slow step to the side, creating a subtle angle, a visual test of Orhan's perception and control, and Orhan shifts slightly, adjusting the alignment of his stance, his hand hovering near his sword, his eyes scanning both figures and the chamber simultaneously, his Alps responding instantly to every nuance, forming a living extension of his awareness, their coordination absolute, invisible, and deadly in precision. Orhan speaks softly, his voice carrying calm authority through the chamber. Every step, every gesture, every sound is accounted for. We move with knowledge, not reaction. Timing dictates power and observation ensures mastery, and the first man inclines his head subtly, recognizing that Orhan's control extends beyond physical command into mental dominance of the environment and situation, acknowledging the completion of a stage in the test without the need for further confirmation. A faint vibration shifts underfoot, and the glowing symbols along the walls now form complex patterns, interlocking arcs and paths, some safe, some dangerous, and Orhan's gaze moves fluidly, tracing the sequences, noting timing, distances, alignments, and potential hazards, committing them to memory in real time, understanding that mastery of the chamber requires both anticipation and integration of all subtle cues simultaneously. The first figure steps slightly closer again, testing both Orhan's patience and control, and Orhan does not flinch, adjusting his weight imperceptibly, shifting his stance while keeping his focus forward, commanding his men silently, forming a defensive and offensive balance, demonstrating absolute calm and precision, showing that his awareness extends beyond the immediate into prediction, control, and readiness for the unexpected. The chamber hums again, faintly but increasingly, the glowing patterns flickering, forming new alignments, almost like the stone is reacting to Orhan's movements. Understanding his integration of the environment and the Alps' tight formation around him subtly, each micro-adjustment reinforcing cohesion, readiness, and trust, all synchronized without spoken words, all flowing seamlessly from Orhan's presence and awareness. Another figure emerges from a shadowed corner, stepping carefully, testing the formation's reach and response, and the Alps adjust instinctively, positioning themselves to maintain both coverage and alignment, their coordination flawless, and Orhan's gaze sweeps the chamber, mentally plotting pathways, predicting trajectories, reading the interplay of space, shadow, and light, every detail integrated into a complete operational map in his mind. Orhan speaks again softly, calmly, but firmly. Observation is control, patience is preparation, awareness is command, every moment, every detail is a choice, and every choice will dictate outcome, and the first man inclines subtly, acknowledging that Orhan is no longer reacting to the chamber but bending it to his understanding, mastering its rules, and transforming the environment into an extension of his own strategy. The chamber responds to this assertion. Vibrations increase slightly, dust falling along the glowing lines, marking paths, sequences, and intersections that Orhan now sees clearly, integrating them instantly, moving without error, preparing for the moment when understanding will convert into decisive action. And the Alps continue to mirror his intent flawlessly, their discipline forming an invisible web of readiness throughout the entire space.